Monday, March 9th, 2020. First, I'd like to recognize that we're on the traditional territory. That's the name of First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. The question period sign-up sheet is on the desk by the computers. During the meeting, any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item. Please write down your name and agenda item on the sheet. At the start of question period, I'll call those who have signed up to the podium to address the committee. Do you have any late items?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I believe that there is going to just be a brief update from Mr. Van Horn on COVID-19.
Thank you. Motion for the adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Councilor Thorpe, seconded by Councilor Brown. All in favor? Carried. And adoption of the minutes circulated. Moved by Councilor Armstrong, seconded by Councilor Markman. All in favor? And that brings us to update COVID-19. Van Horn.
Thank you very much. Oh, good. It's in the minutes now. Just want to provide an update, and we'll be preparing a media release for this afternoon. The City of Nanaimo is closely monitoring the COVID-19 situation through the BC Centre for Disease Control. The City of Nanaimo is working with our internal and external partners on reinforcing the prevention message as recommended by a health authority, which is wash your hands often with soap and water, cover your mouth and nose when coughing and sneezing so you're not exposing other people, avoid others who are unwell and stay home if you're sick, and contact the Public Health Agency of Canada or HealthLink BC to speak to someone regarding COVID-19 if you have concerns. For the most up-to-date information and resources related to COVID-19, we're encouraging people to go to the BC Centre for Disease Control website. It's just being very regularly updated. And just for Council's information, that all city operations, including recreation program, are continuing as scheduled at this time.
Well, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Van Horn? That's good. Appreciate the update. Brings us to number 5. We've got under environmental responsibility, the corporate energy and emissions management program. And Mr. Hardy, you'll be introducing that. Before we begin with the presentation, just ask council that we'll go through the presentation for information and hold your questions till the end of the presentation, just so that we can manage our time through quite an ambitious agenda. And then after the end of the presentation, ask questions and we can enter into discussion.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I ask Scott Pamger, who will do the presentation, to come up. We've touched on this area a little bit with Council when we did the overall environment GPC. Unfortunately, Mr. Pamger wasn't away at that time, but we also didn't get a chance to go into some of the detail on this. This is the first opportunity we've come to present the full energy management program to Council for review and discussion, as well as looking at some of the next levels of some of those areas that we can do. And also just wanted to introduce, before Mr. Pamger comes up, is that today our new Director of Recreation and Culture started, Lynn Wark, who's in the back area. Just wanted to mention that too. This is a key staff person for us on our reorganization, as well as last week, now she's an old timer with us, last Monday, our new, very new and new FTE also, a cultural manager, Julie Bevan. So both are in the audience today. I just want to make sure the council is aware that they both have started. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Pamger, and as the chair had mentioned, if we'll go through the whole presentation and then we'll have a discussion after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Anyway, thank you for having me present today the energy and emissions management presentation. Today's actually my anniversary. This is the 5 years of starting in this position and being looking after infrastructure management and energy When I started 5 years ago, I didn't quite realize how much of a connection there would be between the two, but today it's very, very important because as we renew our assets, we're always considering different energy issues with those things that do consume energy, so of those assets. Anyway, I'll start with the first slide here. And, is it-
The right-hand arrow.
Oh. Oh, there. Yes.
So they keep you running.
So the purpose of this presentation is to review our corporate energy and emissions management program. I will be touching a little bit on the community side, but just a very little bit about that. And the main topics that I'll be reviewing is how we're trying to support council in meeting urgent environmental goals with this program, as well as our commitments that we've made corporately and also community-wise, and our situation, where we're at today in terms of energy management. And key program achievements since the program started back in 2009. And lastly, well, not lastly, current opportunities and challenges that we're facing. And lastly, next steps moving forward, what those might look like. So back in April of 2019, Council declared a state of climate emergency, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world organization that brings all the countries together to discuss these issues, recommended that we try and keep the climate temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius gains by reducing our reducing carbon emissions by about 45% by the year 2030, and trying to go to 70 to 80% of renewable energies by the time we hit 2050. Now, luckily in British Columbia, BC Hydro's energy is considered renewable because it's hydroelectric. So we're at a bit of an advantage compared to many other parts of the world that way. Bottom right screen there, I just brought up a bar chart there that shows that Canada is actually third highest when it comes to emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And in BC, I think the number is about 13.1. So we're still fairly high compared to the rest of Canada, but we've got quite a challenge compared to the rest of the world. And we have the BC Clean Energy Program that is run by the provincial government that has different components like buildings and communities, transportation industry, and policies that are enabling us to try and get to these lower emission quantities over the next years. And the next two slides are going to touch on the corporate commitments and as well as the community commitments in terms of energy and sustainability. And we'll just go, it's a bit of a history. So back in 2002, the city joined the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Partners for Climate Protection Program. So that was 18 years ago. In 2007, the city established a corporate climate change plan, which was based on a study that was done for the city. And this plan matched the BC emissions targets of 33% below 2007 greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2020, and that's where we are today, of course. And 80% below 2007 by 2050 was the goal. During that same year, the Sustainability Committee was formed at the city to try and gather information from the various departments and coordinate projects, as well as the city signed on with the Union of BC Municipalities for the Climate Action Charter. And we also were reporting all our operations and buildings and fleet emissions as part of that. And there's my little arrow just to highlight those objectives. And in 2008, the city joined with BC Hydro's Commercial Energy Manager Program, which is the position that I have right now. And community-wise, there's some similarities but some differences. So in 2008, the official community plan set greenhouse gas emissions that were 3% below 2007 level by 2020. So a 30% difference there from the corporate, and 39% by 2050. So some different numbers. And in 2012, a Community Sustainability Action Plan document was done, which guides the city in identifying community-based measures aimed at reducing energy and emissions and those things. In 2019, the Emissions Reduction Reserve Fund was created to support projects, plans, and initiatives. And the greenhouse gas reduction goals are there, and we're getting more and more aggressive as we realize that climate change is more and more of an issue. And this slide here just kind of shows that the corporate emissions are actually a very small part compared to the community side of emissions. So that's kind of the main point there. And this is just touching on some of the community initiatives. So I've listed the themes and strategies and a few examples of what's in there. So under themes, we have land use and transportation, we have buildings, and we have solid waste issues. And some of the strategies are under land use transportation, compact and fleet communities, alternative and active transportation, low carbon mobility, and we have some examples over on the right-hand side there, like greening the fleet, electrification, and various other measures. And we have a whole section on buildings, and so under buildings, energy efficient buildings, both existing and new. So there's some programs that are supported by Clean BC, like the Better Homes Rebate Program, Realtor Efficiency Program, Rental Apartment Efficiency Program. So lots of different programs and initiatives that help guide us to achieving our goals. And very important is solid waste composting and zero waste, because as I'll be showing later, that's a significant contributor to reducing our emissions. So I've just, our corporate role, I've just kind of got a description up there, is social responsibility and leadership in sustainable energy use. And some of the goals and objectives are to look for ways to improve efficiency, reduce energy, and reduce our costs. And a big part of our program initially was trying to reduce energy and reduce costs, but now there's a much greater recognition of trying to do the right thing in terms of energy management and climate change. So switching from high carbon fuels to cleaner sources of energy and electricity ideally would certainly drive us in that direction, help us reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and lastly, where we can, we should try and increase our renewable energy supply. And that helps us with things like demand factors and our buildings, how much energy we use. So part of our energy manager agreement is with BC Hydro is that we have to maintain a strategic energy management plan document. And it's a living document that describes all the actions, and actually it's a forward-looking business plan for how we intend to manage energy use and our emissions as well. And it asks, or it tries to answer quite a few different questions, like what problems are we trying to solve, where are we at now, where do we want to be, like, are we trying to curb our energy by 3% per year, and also are we trying to reduce our emissions by 5% per year, all that sort of stuff. So it's really a document that is continually updated and submitted to Hydro and shows our actions year to year and how we plan to get there. Very strategic. And this slide is just a quick summary of our emissions. And our emissions are generally made up of contributions from our fleet, our facilities, employee mileage, and contracted services that we have. And we report these annually as well. And just looking at the, I call them ring charts there, we can see under fleet that the different carbon fuels are, of course, where our emissions are coming from. And for example, diesel is a very significant part of those emissions. Under facilities, our major contribution is our use of natural gas in our buildings and also in our fleet, like our refuse trucks or garbage trucks. And last year we reported 5,132 tons of CO2. But we actually get a credit for our organic waste diversion, which is very, very significant because our net balance ended up being just under 3,000 tons for the year. And our target for 2020 was 3,146, so we just came in under that target. And so we met the target, but really big contribution to that was the organic waste, as well as all the other initiatives that we've been doing. So this chart here, the green line represents our target line where we're trying to get to by 2050, and each of the vertical blue bars shows what we've reported in our emissions year by year. So we're trying to stay under that green line, and as I mentioned previously, our total produced emissions were just over 5,000 tons. That's equivalent to about 1,115 regular passenger vehicles on the road in a year. And I've just on the bottom of the screen, I've also made some equivalent comparisons. That total emissions is equivalent to about heating about 629 homes for 1 year with the combined electricity and natural gas, or if it was electricity only, about 916 homes. So you can see that's fairly small actually in terms of our corporate emissions compared to what's happening in the entire community or the city. Challenges and opportunities, there's many. So I'm just going to touch on what's been done, what needs to be done to increase efforts in very general terms, and what this can look like. So the early projects were the ones with short paybacks that made a lot of financial sense and paid for themselves within a fairly short period of time. And the longer payback projects were ones that kind of slid down the scale in our strategic plan for longer, doing them a little later. So what needs to be done to increase efforts though is a few things. Our current energy conservation and management policy is quite dated now, and some of the terminology in there is a little bit restrictive, so I would like to have that updated and include as part of that recognition of greenhouse gas emissions as well, because there's nothing in there right now that speaks to that, and it's certainly necessary to address climate change. With all our projects, we look at assets as we renew them, and anything that consumes some sort of energy, we will analyze that and figure out what is the best plan moving forward to not just reduce energy, but use the right technology that can help us reduce emissions. And with that, we have to have a very open mind to creative solutions with a strong emphasis on social, environmental, and risk considerations with all these reviews. And in terms of renewable energy options in the future, there's quite a few, and I've just listed them there, like solar, photovoltaic, and thermal, wind, Geothermal or geo-exchange is another one that we're considering. And there are other forms like tidal waste heat recovery, which we do some of at some of our facilities. Biofuels, there's been increasing and displacing with more green fuels. So those are some of the challenges and opportunities. And for this section, I'm going to go into our current situation at the city. We've got many different departments at the city, of course, and with those, different energy types. So things like fire rescue and police services has a lot of fleet out in the community fighting fires and doing police work. So lots of carbon-based fuel consumption there versus office buildings. We're lighting our buildings, we're heating our buildings, we're cooling them as well. So very different expectation of and then our recreation facilities, they consume a very large amount of our energy as well. Current energy conservation policy, I touched on that a little bit earlier, and the need to update that. And so when the policy was created in 2008, a target of 1% reduction per year of the 2008 value was what was selected. And that equated to about 234,000 kilowatt hours. So it was kind of a number that was chosen. And also natural gas, about 573 gigajoules. So those were the early numbers. To stay in the Energy Manager program with BC Hydro now requires a minimum of 300,000 kilowatt hours. And that program helps support my position. They actually pay for half of my position. So I hope I'm a good deal.
Great.
Sustainability reserve, which is in the policy as well. One of the key things in there is that the projects to be funded for sustainability have to have a payback of 8 years or less. And that was fairly easy in the early days, but it's getting a little more difficult today. So those are things that I'd like to change. And part of our analysis when we look at projects is to look at overall life cycle, not just the capital costs, but we have to look at, what is the true cost of running that asset over its whole life, and that helps in deciding on the priority of energy projects. So I just wanted to highlight some of our major or significant energy uses here at the city. Most probably already know, but a lot of our building sites, like our office buildings, our operation facilities, like public works, parks operations, water treatment plant, those sort of things, sewer and water pump stations. Those are some of the operational facilities, fire and police, and even parkades. Lights are always on in the parkades. So we have quite a few different things consuming energy, and there's fleet and also city street lighting as well. So the next few slides are just going to show where we were at in 2018, and the reason I've chosen 2018 is we're still compiling the 2019 data, which we'll have shortly. So I just had to take a step back. But this shows our money we've spent on energy in 2018. We spent about almost $4.8 million on all forms of energy. So the blue section is our electricity. It's a huge part of that, which is actually a good thing because it's the cleanest form of energy we could choose. Whereas the other slices of the pie are the carbon-based fuels, and there will be some very significant changes to those numbers as a result of some of the work we've done in the last few years. So those carbon fuels are going to get much smaller. This graph here pertains to electricity use at the city, and it's showing the different areas where we use electricity and how much. So we can see that the main recreation centers use about 25% of our electricity. Street lighting, before any LED street lighting upgrades were done, used about 20%. And then arenas, about 11%, very significant. And the rest of the pie chart is made up of office buildings, fire rescue, parking, police, the conference center. So quite a few sections there that build up to all those electrical consumption. Similarly, this is for natural gas. So the yellow kind of Pac-Man slide of the graph there shows that our natural gas is mostly used at our large recreation facilities. Back in 2018, those were the numbers, but they're changing rapidly with some of our recent upgrades. Arenas is quite significant, or has been, but that's changing, and then all the others are much smaller. I'm just going to highlight some key program achievements over the last few years. At Bevan Park, all our big recreation facilities have large heating plants, and in 2018 we finished an upgrade of the main heating plant, and actually it used to have two of these larger blue boilers. They were original to the facility and quite inefficient. So those were replaced with two high-efficiency natural gas condensing boilers in 2018. We have plans to replace the other blue boiler there by 2024. It should be upgraded. So I'll talk a little bit about that later, but it's there's different opportunities there as well. And we also have heat recovery coils. So as we exhaust air from the building, we try to recapture that heat energy. So we're trying to be as efficient as possible. Certainly, the new boilers are about 42% less natural gas. They use some less electricity, and it saves us money. So it is reducing greenhouse gases. Is it ideal? It doesn't eliminate all of them, but it's a good move in the right direction. And the reason for that is, in order for us to, say, put all electric boilers in, which is an option or some form of that, you need a much larger electrical service than we currently have. But we do have plans to upgrade that service. We're actually going to be doing the final design work this year. And over the last 3 years, at all our major recreation facilities, we also did continuous optimization improvements to those facilities, which ended up in looking at how the buildings were functioning today versus how they were designed to function 25, 30, 40 years ago. And recommissioning would get them back into proper calibration as to where they should be. And those are just a few examples of the pictures. On the far right-hand side, we do mechanical, electrical dehumidification. Heating is by natural gas at the Nanaimo Aquatic Center, which is these pictures. We also have installed large ceiling fans over the pool areas and installed variable speed drives, which allow us to control the speed of the air handling units. So at night, when a facility is not occupied that much, we can turn the system down and slow it down a little bit. Previously, it just ran full tilt all the time, so when it's not occupied, not that efficient. And we also improved a lot of our building controls since as we do these upgrades. Lighting upgrades have always been kind of the easy-to-do projects. We've been doing those ever since the program started. And in 2019, we changed out the lighting over the Bevan Park main pool, the teach pool, the leisure pool. And these are the sort of upgrades we do year by year. And we're really renewing the assets as they reach the end of their life. And with LED lighting, which is a great new technology, it gives us the ability to not just improve lighting, but significantly reduce the energy use as well. Usually by anywhere from 40 to 50%. So kind of freeing up some electrical capacity. So we did those at Bevan Park and Nanaimo Aquatic Center. Those are the rooms we did. Street lighting and parking lot lighting on our buildings. That's also been a major area that's been undergoing lighting upgrades. So we just finished phase 2 of a street lighting program, which was about 435 lights, actually plus 89 lights. So the year before, we did about 430, so we're almost at 1,000 lights that have been completed around the city. The city owns about 4,000 lights, 4,300 lights, and we lease about 3,900 lights from BC Hydro. The lease lights are the lights that are on wood telephone poles or power poles. So anytime you go down the street and you see a wood pole, it's almost always owned by BC Hydro, and that's a lease light, versus the metal ones are the ones that we own. So I believe phase 3 is to be done this year, and it's supposed to do the rest of the city. It's a huge project to complete all the city-owned streetlights. We also worked last year, and we should be getting the final report. BC Hydro intends to upgrade all their lights that they lease to us within the next 2 to 3 years. So we should see all of our streetlights, whether we own them or BC Hydro does, converted to LED in the next 2 to 3 years. Another example of, this is a project, I call it cool water ice making. This is a project directed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions in our ice arenas. So there's, just a little red button. That one there?
Yeah.
Try that. So this little device right here, it's a special vortex, and it's called a degassing vortex. And what it enables us to do is, instead of using 65 degrees Celsius water in our Zambonis, we can use 15 to 20 degrees Celsius water to clean and build ice. Fortis BC helped us with these projects and gave us $20,000 per installation, or they paid for half of it. And in 2018, we did Frank Crane Arena and Cliff McNabb Arena. And in 2016, we did the 9Y Center. So all of our ice facilities now use this technology. And if properly used, that can reduce our natural gas consumption by up to 79% at our ice arena. So very, very significant. So, and that's a technology that wasn't available 10 years ago, but it's about, when the technology comes available, you've got to look at it, see if it really does what it's supposed to do. Anyway, I think a great project for all our ice facilities. And so we also do lighting audits and do various design studies where we evaluate how effective current technology is versus new upcoming technology. And in the last year and a half, this is just a list of the different sites where we did lighting audit studies. So it's an inventory of what we have, what we could go to in LED lighting. And it also includes an analysis of older air source heat pumps to water source heat pumps at Vancouver Island Conference Center. And the new fire station #1, we actually got an energy grant there as well to do energy modeling of the building to make sure it's optimally designed for energy emissions. And I'll be bringing forward a report on March 18th, which will discuss some other, present a few recommendations for further study in our main heating plants. So that's coming shortly. Oops. And this year, we just signed on to a service called PUMA, which is a utility monitoring and analysis service. And what it does is it gathers all our electricity and natural gas bills, and we've got it set up for 8 of our major sites, all our main recreation facilities, this building, any large buildings. So we did it on a trial basis, and it creates data that I can use with our team to look at how our buildings are actually performing, not only in cost, but in emissions, and we can benchmark and compare to other municipalities and other similar facilities in BC and Canada. And it also has the ability to do what's called weather correction data, which every winter could be a little different. So colder winter, you're going to use more energy than, say, a warmer winter. But this software actually enables you to normalize the analysis with weather correction. So very powerful tool that we're using. And this is just a quick overview of some of our achievements over the last 10, 11 years. I'll just start at the left. So we've achieved a 23% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions since 2009. And that equates to taking about 300 passenger cars off the road per year. Remember, our total corporate emissions is just over 1,100. So we've taken about 300 off. And energy savings, which is the next circle over, there's a big number there. Electricity and natural gas. So the savings that we've achieved there could power our Nanaimo Aquatic Center with electricity for 12 years. So that's what those savings have enabled us to do. And about 6.5 years of natural gas at Nanaimo Aquatic Facility, just the initial. And we also have an energy production facility at the Water Resources Energy Recovery Facility on the Nanaimo Lakes Road. And it produces about 800,000 kilowatt hours a year. I think it's about, $90,000 a year?
Right to 100, yeah, that's even a little higher than that sometimes.
A little higher than that. So it's nice to see that through our own utilities and infrastructure, we're actually recreating energy as well. And we've received just over $2 million in incentives from BC Hydro and Fortis in the last 11 years towards all of our projects, and also funding my position. And lastly, avoided energy costs. We've avoided spending almost $7 million in energy costs. And just to kind of put that into perspective a little bit, that could buy you about 15 automated garbage trucks. So it's money saved, money spent, that sort of idea. And this is almost the last slide. Next steps, moving forward, just in very general terms, is I would like to update the energy conservation and management policy to reflect, where we are going corporately, and also in line with community and corporate and legislation by provincial government and recommendations by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, those sort of things. Change our sustainability funding project criteria to open up a few more opportunities. And we're going to be working on reviewing and updating both the corporate climate change plan, but also the community sustainability action plan. So I know Dale's group is working through Rob Lewis and myself on that and others. And choosing electric over carbon-based energy solutions where practical and cost-effective is a very important thing that we can do in terms of reducing our energy, but also our emissions. That's a big decision maker there. And I continually look for new technology, new advancements that help us to find different ways of reducing our energy consumption. That device, that Vortex I showed earlier at our ice arenas, that's an example of that, or LED lighting, there's another example. And support fleet with green fleet strategy, so it's another thing that we can do. And develop renewable energy projects aimed at improving sustainability. We do buy our electricity from BC Hydro, it's very economical, but where we actually generate electricity on our own sites, we can actually use that energy to shave off our peak demands, which not only creates energy, but saves us in some of our higher energy costs that we would pay. And that's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. And if any questions.
Great, thank you so much for that presentation, and yeah, I'll open it up here to council for questions and discussion. So, Council Turley.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to, sorry, I always forget your name.
Oh, Scott.
Scott, sorry. So I have a couple of questions, actually. One, you referred to CO2 savings throughout the presentation, but you also referred to greenhouse gas. And of course, the two are not. One is included in greenhouse gas, but there are other gases that are also such as methane.
Yes.
And is that included in the goals as to reduction amount of natural gas and methane?
Yes. Yeah, the reference to CO2 is actually kind of the base standard. It has what we call a global warming potential of 1, so it's like a reference. Methane, for example, is 25 times as harmful. So greenhouse gases are just referred back to CO2 as the standard base unit of 1. So, but there are different types of emissions.
If I could have a follow-up. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
So the other thing, of course, is I was somewhat surprised that the use of composting actually reduced because breakdown of organic matter involves the release of methane and, in one case, CO2.
Right.
I know at the regional dump they are capturing as much methane as possible, but I don't know what is happening at the compost center at the point.
Right. Yeah, so the credits that we get are really geared towards like if preventing that methane from going out into the open air, because it's like 25 times as harmful on the environment. So the assumption there is, or the practice is that we're not releasing that methane into the environment, and that's why we get the credit from our organic waste. So it's preventing that from going into the atmosphere.
So the facility, I know it's a private facility at Dew Point, is that, I'm assuming that's where most of the compostables go.
Yes.
City. Have they got a capturing ability there as well?
I actually don't know all the details. I know out at the Cedar landfill site, they do capture and generate electricity, I believe, from the methane. But there's the other organic waste, composting for soils and stuff like that, which is where you get a lot of credit for not releasing that as methane.
So that's another potential gainer there.
Yeah, so those programs certainly are geared towards trying to reduce emissions as much as possible.
Thank you.
I've got Councillor Bonner for Audits.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, I have it on page 14, it's the 2009 to 2019 achievements. And we say that we reduced 23% our greenhouse gases from 2009. In 2007, though, we had a corporate plan to reduce the 2007 levels by this year, 33%. In 2008 and 9, those were our highest years. They actually went up considerably, the city's greenhouse gases. So I'm trying to compare apples with tangerines here. In that this is a constantly moving flag here. So are you saying that if we reduced our greenhouses from 2009, which was considerably higher than 2007 by 23%, then we actually did not achieve our goal of 33% reduction of the 2007 levels? Is that a correct statement?
What I know is that the way the reporting of greenhouse gases was done in 2007 is a little bit different. Over time it changed a little bit, so new things were opened up to take credit for. And I do remember there's different spikes in how much greenhouse gases we were releasing. So I'm not actually sure 100% how the math was done back in those days. But I know based on the number that we were at in 2007 versus the number we're at today, the work we've done should be about what I reported there for the 23% reduction. So there have been highs and lows in there. I don't know if that quite answers.
Well, what I'm seeing, if I just roughly mapping this thing out, is we actually didn't achieve 33% of the 2007 levels, but we've achieved 23% of the 2009 levels.
Yes, yeah, that's about right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and without the organic waste credit, we would not have met our 2020 targets, we would have fallen short.
Which brings me to my next question, thank you. I always look at these credits as a kind of a get out of jail free card. Reason being is, if we had just dumped stuff into our landfill, including all our organics, and not covered it, and not collected methane and everything else, all those gases would have risen into our atmosphere. But we're not, we're actually collecting them. So we're covering our landfill. We have a process where we collect a good chunk of our methane gas. So is that an accurate statement? Like, can we actually, in all honesty, I'm not saying that nobody's honest here, can we as a society say that we're using that credit when we actually would have never, in today's world, we would have never generated those greenhouse gases in the first place? So why can't we use it as a credit?
Yeah, the provincial governance reporting method allows us to use that process as a credit. And you're right, I mean, if we weren't doing it, it would have just gone up into the air. There'd be no credit at all. So they call it the Climate Action Revenue Incentive Program, which is the reporting program. And it's structured to allow us to use that organic waste as a credit towards reducing our reported emissions. Exactly.
I hear what you're saying. I'm philosophically disagreeing with the concept.
Yeah, I know actually, it's just the program that we're allowed to do. I kind of feel like it's not being 100% honest with ourselves. Yeah, I agree.
And if I ask one more question, I've got a bunch of questions, but just one more, is in your opinion, since we passed the climate emergency in April of last year, have we taken off and with brand new programs? Because what you're reporting on is what we've been doing since 2007 up till now. But what things can you say that the city has done that really kicked in April 2nd or the day after our emergency climate resolution?
So what initiatives are we to kind of reduce our emissions?
That's above and beyond what we were already doing to begin with.
Okay. One of them, which is a report I have coming forward, is to look at our heating plants, which are mostly natural gas right now. And what I'd like to do is study the options and feasibility of potentially converting them to electric, either heat pump or pure electric, which is completely benign, I guess. And but also exploring geo-exchange opportunities as well. So it's really looking at what are the possibilities. But at this point, it's examining just the options and feasibility. So we can decide, is this a good idea or not? So that's coming forward shortly for your consideration.
Great. I saw Mr. Sims and Mr. Harding had commentary.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, was trying to show over your shoulder the one graph that Mr. Paminger had in the very early on that showed the tracking of our GHG targets and the various actual reported amounts each year. So that, I just wanted to draw your attention to that.
Yeah, third there.
I think Mr. Paminger answered the question. I think this is one of those big steps. So as we outlined here, there's some steps we need to do to change to make some of council's priorities votes. So we're going to change how we're doing our financial limiting on some of our projects. We've got to look at some other aspects of. We've many years been looking at cost reduction. Now, how do some of these projects we switch rather than just saying a cost reduction? It's greenhouse gas reduction. So this is a big step, part of it.
Yeah, certainly moving forward to reduce carbon emissions is going to cost more money, so operationally. But the one thing I always do is I look at what's the opportune time to replace an asset, and then we get very serious about what's the best technology that can help us reduce energy, reduce emissions, and improve reliability and that sort of thing.
Great. I've got Councillor Thorpe, Evans, and then Turley again.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, if I may, I have two questions. Thank you, Mr. Ballinger.
appreciate the update. I think maybe this is sort of the opposite to Councillor Bonner's question, but I think the city has been very proactive in initiatives to protect the environment and save us money for the past 10 years, certainly since the time I've been involved in council. Maybe the impetus now is more related to the environment. Prior it was saving some cash for the city, but there's been a lot of things done in our facilities over a long term that have been very impressive, and I think have put us maybe ahead of the curve compared to other cities. My question is with regard to emissions, our corporate emissions, I think, in my opinion, the city has done and continues to do a very good job, thanks to you and your efforts and your leadership there. Community emissions is something that we need to tackle, and I'm wondering, how is the best venue for doing that? Is it going to be through our OCP review and initiatives there, through a sustainability action plan? How can we best address community emissions and trying to reduce those?
That's a very good question. I know, like my position being funded by BC Hydro, or at least half of it, they are also able to fund a community position if there's a desire for that. I don't know if Dale, did you want to elaborate a little bit on what you're thinking from a community side?
Thank you, Chair, through to Councillor Thorpe. I think, first of all, I go back to one of the earlier slides that Scott had about, we had originally the Community Sustainability Action Plan, which has a number of initiatives that we've done in, remind me, Scott? 2012. So we're currently, as part of the work plan that the Environment Committee is looking at, is reviewing that document. Our hope and our intent is that is going to come forward. That work will be carrying on simultaneously with the work on the official community plan and the Parks, Rec and Culture plan, our water strategy, and that the policies coming out of the new and updated Community Sustainability Action Plan will feed those documents and I think become very fundamental to how our new OCP comes forward. So I'm expecting, as that work's laid out, there'll be new actions and initiatives that come out of that updated Sustainability Action Plan, which will be our focus and targets moving forward.
Thank you very much, and if I may, Chair, my second question. In one of the slides near the, in fact, the last slide, you state, choose electric over carbon-based energy solutions where practical and cost-effective. And I guess my concern is, and I'd ask you to comment on this, as there are more and more demands on electricity as a source of power, I'm sure that we'll gradually see costs rise. And I wonder if you've noticed that happening already, and if so, is that going to be a concern in the future?
Yes, very good question. Again, I think in the last 6 years, we've seen electricity increase by about 27%. So fairly significant. It's on average over 5% a year almost. Starting to slow down. So we've seen lots of increases there. We're building Site C, so more capacity in our system. And sorry, the other part of your question was like, yeah.
Just whether you noticed that price increase starting to happen, and is it cause for concern in terms of us wanting to move to cleaner sources?
It is. It's definitely cause for concern a little bit, but it's like, we're trying to select the cleanest form of energy. We're trying to reduce energy, and I mean, it's like a ball that keeps going up in the air. I don't think energy costs are ever going to get cheaper than they are right now. Natural gas is kind of stabilized, but it's not the cleanest compared to electricity. So, if we're to move more to electrical, like it's going to cost more money, but we'll be able to say that we're producing less emissions for sure. But there's some pretty significant costs associated with going with all electric. But it's like, what's acceptable.
I appreciate that. It's just good to be aware of. Thank you very much.
You got Councillor Turley and Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. So the question I have is, does the system allow for, since I'm referring to the initial, allow for credits when we enact a bylaw, for example, that allows for more densification in housing?
That's a good question. I don't know if I can answer. Dale, do you have any idea about that? Or?
Still net production.
Yeah, like community one?
Well, I'm thinking of corporate, we passed a bylaw to
yeah.
allow it, which could result in fewer cars potentially on the road.
Yes, actually there is a component in there for electrification of vehicles. I would have to look into the particulars about how that, if it's, I know corporately we can, certainly. There actually is a new line item. That is something that, because electric cars didn't really hardly exist 10, 15 years ago. It wasn't part of the reporting structure, but it is now. And so, yeah, most definitely.
When you're particularly referring to electrification of cars, I'm thinking of more people per square foot living.
Oh, I see, okay. Yeah. That, actually, I don't know. Yeah.
Councillor Hammonds, my apologies. And then Councillor Brown, Armstrong.
No, I'm for change.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies to everyone for being a little late. I'm curious about the corporate versus community GHGs. I apologize that I missed the first few slides, but there is one that shows corporate emissions is this big and then community emissions is this big. So it seems like if we're going to be more strategic, we'd want to go after the community emissions because they make up a greater piece of the pie. What I'm reading from this, though, is that the corporate emissions are what we can really have control over, so that's why we go after it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, very accurate.
Okay.
I mean, we started out corporately, and it's a very controllable thing because we have control of our assets, and the community is there's lots. It's a much bigger task, but of course we influence that so greatly as well. But we don't have as much control of some things, but some things we do, like step code building, code improvements. All sorts of things. We influence those things greatly.
Okay.
But it is a much bigger contribution overall of emissions, for sure.
Okay. Thank you. And a further question, if I may. You, on your last slide, identified 3 different plans that are up for update soon. The energy conservation or energy management, corporate climate change strategy, and then the action plan, sustainability action plan, pardon me. How do those fit together? Is there a key document that the other 2 fall under? Like do we have a policy document that, or at least a document that kind of everything funnels into, or is it spread out by department? Do you understand me?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how those 3 plans mesh.
Yeah, Dale could probably want to talk a little bit about the OCP.
I think, through the chair to Councillor Hemmons, I think that's a good question, and it's one that the Environment Committee has had some discussions of late, and it's about this overall environmental framework and how does this all fit together. We're going back Wednesday of this week to the committee to talk about that very issue. So from staff's perspective, I think one part of the overall environmental framework talks about climate change, and under that climate change is both a corporate response and a community response to reducing, and then there's a corresponding part about how do we deal with the impacts of climate change. I think that is one part. But as we come forward, if Mr. Lawrence was here, he'd be saying that as we come forward with our updated community sustainability action plan, our intent is to bring the corporate in together, not to have multiple different documents, but to have one clear document that ties the 2 together and tells a clear story about what the city's doing overall.
Great.
Climate change and GHG reduction.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hemmons, your community question is what keeps me up at night. Transit, that's how you get it. And through you to Scott, just you touched on a couple of points thanks so much for the presentation, it was great to see the work you've done. A couple of things that you're saying need some updating, the energy conservation management policy, and then also I think maybe some changes around the criteria for how you use the Disability Reserve Fund, and probably the payback period, I imagine, needs to be revisited. Are those coming before council anytime soon, and is there some decision points or some direction that you or other staff might be looking for to help shape that?
they're really on my radar right now, and what I was kind of wanting to see is this community and corporate climate action plan, more substance there, so that once that's kind of developed, we could go back and refine our policies somewhat based on those principles that might be in that document. So I don't have anything coming in soon, but certainly based on the community, or sort of the Nanaimo action plan or climate action. That would guide a lot of that, I hope. I see it being really tied together. I don't think they should be separate. Even though the numbers are a little different. They need to be pretty close to one another, if not the same. So.
Thank you. Mr. Harding, then Mr. Rudolph.
Well, Mr. Rudolph, I think Mr. Rudolph's probably going to say what I was going to say.
I don't know, through the chair, the Environment Committee has started the conversation of how to put this together and establish some priorities, which needs to report back to council, and going through this framework, how do these all fit together, what are the priorities, but council itself will be, needs to set policy direction and priorities. And you do have one of your 4 pillars in your strategic plan is the environment. You've established a select committee on environment. This is a priority. Even the committee itself is determining what its priorities are in terms of most effective use of its time and how to be focused. So, there's lots of things to refresh policies, to update our metrics and our standards, and then follow through with actions to actually achieve that. So I guess what was hopefully demonstrated today is that we're not starting from zero here. We're starting from a fairly decent long-term plan. And I get that comment about what have we done since we declared the climate emergency. Specifically, we can't say there's been one target that's moved or whatever, but we can say we've launched all these plans. And I think we do need to tell our story better, because we are going there, but we do need to refresh it. And there's lots of balls in the air, the OCP and so forth. So one of the things that came to mind that Scott mentioned is that maybe in this year's budget cycle, you'll see fit to finance one of those the community energy position that was a candidate for half funding by BC Hydro as an example. That's a tremendous payback. If that would be one way to move the dial faster and that type of thing. So I think the work of the committee is pivotal over the next several months, and you'll see hopefully there's a lot of work to do there to be focused, and then the bigger strategies that are ensuing with the OCP and the action plans will all develop policy frameworks which are going to last the next 10 years. So it's very, very important stuff. So I'd say you launched things, but we don't have very specific detailed initiatives that are, unless council wished to do something very specific around that in the short term, which would take more workshops and more thinking around it. But today, again, just a baseline. We want to leave you the impression of we're not in a bad spot, but there's a lot more work to do. And the longer you go along, the steeper the curve gets in terms of making progress. So just your feedback's critical, obviously, and any ideas you might funnel through to the Environment Committee would be good.
Great. I also have a few comments. I appreciate the amount of work that our facilities management and energy management have been done already. And I think that the slide on the next steps, Councillor Brown alluded to the updating the energy conservation management policy, changing the sustainably funding project criteria, reviewing our corporate climate change plans, the elements with the green fleet. This is really great, and I think I really hope that we can stay focused and move this, as quickly as the pace as we can with our capacity. And if there's anything that council needs to do to support that direction, to please let us know. And also just with the Environment Committee, I know that there's a lot of work to be done there, and that but not to have that committee hold up elements that we can put by council and move forward. One element is with the targets. I know it's tricky when you hear the 207 targets and we're shooting for 33% below those, and then it changes the dates, and then it's difficult to go back to our benchmark and to really look, have we gotten, from our planning back then, have we reached the targets that we were hoping to reach now, or are we 10% behind from what we thought we were going to be? And I think that moving forward, it's absolutely critical that we build clear targets and that we have a process in place to review where we are with our targets, and then the plans and strategies to make sure that we end up where we want to be. And I think, if anything, I really hope that in this process of reviewing all our plans, that we really make sure that that element is in there, because I really like to know where we are, and I think the community wants to know where we are, so that when the decisions come up about having to, put more capital costs into maybe switching over to electrification, it's clear that we need to do that if we want to achieve what we want to do. And so, and the final point I want to make is that I think that we do have more control over the corporate emissions, but the community emissions is the big black dot that we need to tackle. And absolutely, I think that we need to be organizing to hire and use that money that PC Hydro has for somebody, for a position to support us with that. And so if we can make sure that we're moving along to make sure that we can secure that type of position, I'm very supportive of that. So if there's not any more questions.
Just a comment more. I'm just reflecting on this, and what strikes me about this file that is different than other files in the city is that the research and our interest in this and the developments that are happening in this field are going really rapidly, right? There's best practices popping up all over the place. And so for me, I totally hear having clear targets and outcomes, et cetera, and I believe in that completely, but I also feel like this one needs to be more flexible, to be able to adapt, because I'm hearing you say, that piece that you showed and how it reduced I can't remember the language, but there's advancements in technology that we're not anticipating in our plans today that may be in fact there for us 5 years down the road. So I don't want to lock us into anything, and I don't imagine we will, but that this work in this file, it maybe needs to be a bit more flexible than the rest of our kind of plans and strategies, because it is moving quickly.
Yeah, you're very right. Actually, heat pump technology is starting to be used on a small scale for heating water that we generally haven't seen that much of. It's just at the forefront now, but it's kind of small scale. But maybe in 10 years from now, that could replace, to some degree, what our boilers do, right? So more efficiently, anyway. But there's still limitations currently. So.
One more, because you've asked for ideas. I don't know if I've shared this with all of council, but the town of Bridgewater in Nova Scotia took their city hall and basically used it as a test site for this is how you do solar, and they made City Hall, I'm not going to get this exactly right, but let's, for sake of argument, they made it zero emission, their building, and they used that as a demonstration to show the public this is how much our energy was reduced by putting on solar panels or using heat pump. And then they offered loans to citizens that you could pay back on your income tax over 5 years if they wanted to use solar technology or heat pump or whatever. And that, I know the uptake for that program was quite good. And I don't know, I've heard that legislatively we can't do that in BC, or I'm just not sure, but I see that as a really great program, and I think there's a lot more out that are like that. They're going to help us target the community piece.
One more question from Councillor Armstrong, and then...
That just brings me to something that I've always been concerned about. Everybody's so focused on CO2, but when you read, they don't know how to dispose of wind turbines. They just sit in the grounds. Same thing with solar panels. So when we're doing this, we need to look at also the impact that's having on other parts of the environment, because I think we're so focused on CO2, we forget about electric batteries can't be disposed of right now except for in 2 countries. That's coming. The fact that it's child labor used to produce the lithium in the Congo, so we got to think about all these things too, right? And when you talk about, why don't you get community involved in some of this, because some of them are thinking in those terms. Is the benefit of costing? So there's a lot of people that are skeptics. We don't want to hear that, but there are. So these are things that I think we've got to think about when we're looking at some of these plans, that there's more than just CO2 when we're talking about environment. Thank you.
So one little bitty comment, Councillor Bonner.
It was just by your replacement of the boilers. You're replacing the blue one. And you mentioned that the electrical requirements to do an electrical one are quite extensive.
Yeah.
And from my point of view, and as a citizen, I would be fine with paying the extensive stuff, because if we get a new one that's burning fossil fuels, we will have a new one for the next 20 years burning fossil fuels. Or longer. And I think that's something we should also add to our calculations, just so thing, I'm not telling you how to do your job.
No, actually, the report coming on the March 18th is all about this. So it's
It's the exact example we want to bring some of those projects forward to council to make some of those decisions.
Rubber hits Staff is already on it. Well, Mr. Manager, thank you very much for the presentation and appreciate the effort into this. Item number
5B1.
Did you want to be one, city and animal facilities, to be introduced by Mr. Hardy?
Chair, just wanted, this is another long session.
Might want a 5 minute
Want to have a small break or?
Yes.
Okay, 5-minute intermission. Yeah, recess for 5 minutes, and then we have an hour on this.
Just wanted
I am to my seniors.
But you aren't too He's your senior. He's a senior.
He's a high one. Leave it to me now, it's a lot.
Okay. Maybe we'll get started. Just kind of in terms of what I'm thinking for timing, we're already a little bit behind schedule, but we'll give this an hour, and that'll leave us 35 minutes for plastic bags, and if we need to go longer, we will. So I know there's a lot in this presentation, and
Just to preface, Mr. Chair, this entire presentation will end on something that suggests that maybe if there's an appetite for the topics that we identify, we can come back and give more detailed updates on a couple of those ideas that are there. And so you don't have to, this is an information session, but if general guidance and a direction from council comes out of this at the end, that would be helpful. So I guess we'd be seeking whether you have an appetite for us to pursue and bring back more information on some of those topics, and if we're missing some of them, which ones are they, and we can do that as well. So if you roll that into an hour's conversation, I think that would be our objective, is to try to land in a place that kind of know the baseline of where we're at. Staff are identifying some priorities that it thinks need to be dealt with, and then there's some other ones where I think council may have an interest in exploring, and they may be some of the smaller facility initiatives on the Parks, Rec and Culture side. And so Mr. Harding's going to zip through the PowerPoint without reading every one, but yeah, the reminder to council is that for folks that are watching at home, or who may want to look at it through the stream services, there's some benefit for it to be methodical and go through this so that everybody has the same set of information on that level. So I've already taken up some of this time.
thanks for that. We'll be paying attention to that last slide, next steps. Mr. Harding, yeah.
Just skip right the last slide already.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm known for my brevity.
Me too.
So I hope you're okay for sitting down, because we're going to tag team a bit today on this presentation with myself, Mr. Group, and Ms. Legan. So, and I will also ask Councillor Armstrong to direct me if I'm slowing down too much. She's going to do this, get moving faster on it. But we're also kind of glad we came in after the energy presentation, because the energy presentation did talk a lot about what we're going to talk about today in the sense of our major built facilities. We also just, for fun, we put it around the room, all the different buildings that we talked to. And when we get into this, we'll talk about the things what we are talking about, and then some of the facilities that we're not talking about, and we'll explain these in it. But I won't go through everything. What we're trying to do is go through a little bit of the history of our facilities in the NIMO, the types of facilities that we have, because there's a variety of types, as Mr. Paminger mentioned, our asset management, where we are with the asset management program on built environment, on built assets versus our linear assets. We won't spend too much time on that. Our considerations for setting priorities, and again, this is really for council to discuss on some criteria of how we're going to start setting some priorities for our buildings. Just do a quick overview of our seismically, where we are with some of our seismic analysis. Future, again, which ties into some of the priorities. Projects overview. We won't spend a lot of time here, but again, if you wanted, as we get into discussion, if we want to drill into some of our 5-year capital, what we're doing to renew our assets, because most of our 5-year capital is about renewing assets, not building new assets. And then Ms. Legan will get into some of the financial aspects. And then hopefully, if we go through this quick enough, we'll have more time for council to discuss, and then talk about some next steps of what we'll bring back to, as Mr. Rudolph mentioned. So the reason I just mentioned history here is this, prior to 1970s, the city didn't actually have a lot of facilities, and I won't go through every facility, but in the prior 70s, it was relatively geographically small, and we didn't have a lot of those assets. one of the bigger, actually, the reason I mentioned this is amalgamation in 1974, and a lot of residents don't understand too, is the Nanaimo after 74 grew exponentially. Really, there was a number of improvement districts that collapsed into the city, and with that, there was a number of those buildings and facilities that we inherited. Either Chase River, Archer Bay, Pleasant Valley, all over the community. So some of the assets were getting end of life, or some of those assets that came to the city as part of the amalgamation. The 80s, you'll notice, and this is definitely indicative of the recession of the 80s, and you see that there wasn't a lot done in the 80s, and that's why we throw those here, but some very small amount of facilities. The 90s, we started seeing, again, then with the growth that we had in Nanaimo, we saw some growth in areas, particularly with our recreation facilities, but also expansion of our fire halls. As fire halls, particularly some of those improvement district fire halls, went from volunteer to fully staffed fire halls, and expansion of that. 2000s, again, quite a bit of capital investments in buildings, and some purchases also here. A few purchases, and I get into the fire hall. That's where we found the Vancouver Island Conference Center, the New Nanaimo Center projects in general, which include the Ice Center and other areas, and the Nanaimo Parks. In 2010, so much as this building we're in right now, the water treatment center plant was a major facility development, and then the purchase of Stockton Stadium in Roanoke. So now the city now there are 200 buildings or facilities, and a variety of different types, which we'll get into in a second here. Just want to mention this is what we're not including. So when we talk about facilities, a water fountain, a playground, harborfront walkway, those are major assets, and in some ways they're called facilities. We're just not going to talk about that today. In this one, I'm trying to focus in on those buildings and the buildings that you see around. So if you're asking later on, well, what about your skateboard park redevelopment, playground redevelopment, we're not including those in this discussion. So different types, major staff buildings like this building here for staff and City Hall. You have city operations yards, and we'll talk about this this project or this issue. We have basically 4 city operation yards, and one of the issues that's coming forward and has been over the years is how do we look at consolidation of some of those operations. And then all the civic facilities and sense of public works, all the pump houses, the reservoirs, the different smaller utility areas throughout the city that still are still buildings and still require to be under our asset management and consideration. Then our fire rescue buildings, of course, the number one, Station 1 is being rebuilt starting this year, and then there's the other 4, and of course some other ones. And then we have the 2, which is on contracts with us, is the 2 main RCMP police buildings, Patrol and Fitzwilliam. Vancouver Island Conference Center, major facility, which of course also houses the Nanaimo District Museum now. And then just added this one, just because there is an aspect of what we do with facilities, which is not just energy management or other aspects, but it's more the heritage facilities. So we have a number of heritage facilities which require some different means of managing them and preserving them. Our cultural facilities, these are all city-owned facilities. All of them run under either a co-management agreement with the societies or direct lease agreements. But they're still city assets, and they're included in our planning and renewal projects. And then a variety of all our recreation facilities. Mr. Pamger went through a lot of those, and then we'll go through each one. And then our park facilities, the ones out there, all the different washrooms, things like the Dale Sutton washroom and all the different field houses, picnic shelters, all the variety that make up, again, the list around you here makes up over the 200 buildings that we have. Then asset management, we'll spend a lot of time on this, and Mr. Sims has done a lot over the years, so I'm talking to you about our asset management program. Facilities are very similar. We're not 100% with our overall asset management plan.
but we follow the same asset management principles. I don't know if Mr. Green, you want to add to this one?
No, I mean, one of the most important things to remember is managing our assets is something that we do every day. We maintain the assets we own, the facilities we own, the buildings we own, every single day. The goal in showing this, the asset management framework wheel is what we're doing now is formalizing those more long-term approaches to how we do asset management rather than it being, somewhat reactionary. It's more long-term, proactive, and predictive asset management so that you really have an understanding of what you own and what condition it's in and how much does it cost to own it.
A good portion of what Mr. Pammage's work is with energy is also working on the overall facility asset management plan. That's why corporate is a corporate function, his energy management component is a corporate function, as is the other part of his work, and staff work with him on the overall facility asset planning side. And one of the programs that's helping us, I'll get Mr. Crew to talk about this, is a grant that we also received a couple years ago to do complete asset reviews, and I'll let Mr. Crew mention this program.
Yeah, so further to what I was talking about before was we maintain our assets every day, and the goal is to create long-term plans for all of the building assets or facility assets that we own. So the idea behind this project is that we actually, through third-party and other, even fourth-party consultants, look at all of our buildings, facilities, and amenities to be able to assess the condition they're in, to be able to, A, have a complete list of every asset from about $5,000 and up is kind of that starting point, so that we know how much do we own and what's the condition that it's in, and if we want to then be able to have conversations around capital plans, maintenance plans, levels of service, those kind of things, we can have really wholesome conversations around that because of having completed frameworks for each of the facilities and buildings that we own.
So I forgot that one there. That's a grant that we received, which is great. And this again. So I just wanted to use this slide here to talk a little bit as we get into the assessing priorities, and maybe this will come back to this when the council makes some discussions. But really, there's those community requests or those demands of which over community requests is increased staffing, which staffing then increases the need for more facilities. Then we have the corporate priority. It's that circle. Life cycle of an amenity, as Mr. Pammager talked a little bit about on the asset side of things. And again, the reason we went through some of the history is that some of those assets are at the end of life or need to be renewed or even be removed. Then there's that increasing demand. Luckily in the NAMO we have an increase in demand and not a decrease in demand. And then we have the actual use, as you hear from everything from pool temperatures to everything else, and then it goes back into those community requests. So that's why I know it's a constant change. So what do we use to create some of those? So plans and studies, our community planning processes, master plans, OCP even, space needs, corporate and community, condition assessments, feasibility studies, development plans. We have a variety and a host of those which we can drill into, and if council has any discussion or desire on any of these. Then other considerations, reactions to a failure of a component in the 2012 seismic review. So the ones up above are really talking about the community demand and desires, and then these other ones are ones where we have to react to situations. This was a seismic review. It's one we need to always bring forward. In fact, the reason that we're in this building right now today was based on the City Hall Annex being in a condition that needed to be done. So this is a review that was done. We've just included the ones that are in a criteria that need to be addressed in certain ways. Some have been now. Some we put on hold, which again we'll talk about a little bit. Particularly, always talk about the Chase River Activity Center. We do have a plan. We could remediate that, but then again, as it is an asset that we want to continue with one of the desires of the Chase River community and our last Parks and Recreation and Culture Master Plan being we need to look at more recreational facilities in the south end. So these are some of these decisions will definitely need to be decided on. Some we continue to be worked on. It's in your presentation. We can come back and talk about I won't go into each one of them right now, but we can come back on some of the council would like to. And then this, of course, whenever you do a list like this, of community identified requests, of course, we're going to probably miss something. But these, I think, one of the reasons we added these ones here is there's no shortage of community desires for different things. So we've bolted this into some different categories. So we have the arts and culture demands, or projects that have either come formally or informally to council, or in a plan of some sort. And again, I won't go through each list. Civic ones, then this is more dealing with our own day-to-day operations for staffing and facilitating staffing in different aspects, or in regards to the RCMP, our contract, and city staff of housing net. Variety of recreational demands. Continuation of recreational plans. Again, some of these are in process now of looking, particularly at the Texton. The Texton planning process will definitely generate some projects going forward, and then others that are in nothing formally done on it, but definitely have been in front of council and talked asked the council for some. Bevan Park is a little on its own, just because Bevan Park does have a number of plans. The master plan was adopted just a number of years ago. With that, a number of facilities were identified, both in the redevelopment and improvement to the existing facilities that are there now, as well as to some leasehold properties talked about over the years. And then just here are some of the existing documents that used to help guide council and the community what we're doing. The strategic plan, your strategic plan, the official community plan, some of the existing department-wide planning documents, the Parks, Recreation, Culture Master Plan, which again is at the end of its time and we're being done. The Fire Services Plan, Standard of Fire Service Response Coverage, Police Service Delivery Plan, Cultural Plan for Creative and Nanaimo. And these aren't all of them, but there's a number of plans that do talk about facilities and the need for different buildings throughout the community. So 5-year capital projects overview. Mr. Goose is going to do a quick, just in the next 5 years, just to show again, we have a number of projects in the queue in both a 5-year and then a staff that plans out for 10 years. But again, a lot of these are renewal and not necessarily new. So just give it a quick.
Yeah, just a really high level. I mean, we've got over, so the 5-year plan that we're talking about was the plan that was developed in 2019, so looking at 20 to 24, right? So even the condition assessment project that we really briefly talked about, the information that comes from that plan is still needing to be entered into future capital plans as that information comes forward. And so we'll have to find a format on how we bring that information forward rather than just in regular budget deliberations, but actually as the information comes to us in phases, maybe we come to you in phases to show what that next phase of information, what that looks like, right? So just at a high level, this year sees about 79 capital projects, including Fire Station 1. Next 21 sees about 45 capital. So when I say capital, it's a project that's been identified in the financial plan and it hits a certain threshold. I think it's $10,000. So we have maintenance projects that live in operating, and then capital projects due to threshold live in that capital plan. But just an example, so 22 sees about 49, 23 about 32, and then 2024 sees about 37, and then those annual investments look like about $6.2 million this year, excluding the fire hall, $6.5 million in 21. 3.6 in 22. And so what you start to see is the first 2 years of the plan really are well defined, and then as the last 3 years, you see the numbers start to drop, because as we get more information and as we assess, we continually feed the capital plan, so we start to bolster those amounts as well. And that's why the 10-year planning is so important, because we're able to feed further out and just look at that 5-year window. Right?
The reason I want to mention this is that there is investment going on in facilities constantly with this, and we may not see brand new buildings being in the planning of the fire hall, of course, this year. A lot of those is the cost to keep re-roofing, HVAC, other amenity improvements that go through. And then our yearly maintenance projects are lighting, equipment repairs and renovations, painting, again, this is corporately, pump and compressor replacements, roofing, HVAC repair and maintenance, electrical control panel replacements, water filtration system replacements, and all the different things that go into it, keeping all our facilities.
And not an exhaustive list by any means, just some examples.
Did you have numbers in the one?
I don't, absolutely.
So again, we didn't want to go into it, telling you when we're changing the filtration on this building, although we can definitely do that. We can tell you exactly when the filters are being replaced, but I don't think we want to get into that. And we actually have a couple asset removals. We rarely remove our assets, but this year we have 2 asset removals, both Westwood Lake Caretaker Home and Next Point Caretaker Home will be removed this year. We have this in here because we sometimes do remove built assets, and some of our discussion going forward on some of these buildings will either have to decide to put some major investment into them. Not these two, they're going to come up. But another discussion as we go through the Chase River, Parch Bay, or just to name it. So decisions that will be needed to be made on these facilities is the Chase River Activity Center. It's still now one of our higher risks on seismic, as well as it is a demand for it in that area for use. The Parch Bay Activity Center, again, it was actually an initial plan to enhance or remove. We'll need to make those decisions. Again, these are, it goes back to a reasonably historical slide on amalgamation. These were amalgamation Kinhat, same issue. Again, Kinhat, just as you know, we don't actually own that land. It's actually a lease from the province on that property. The Namo Curling Club, again, there's some issues with it, but we definitely have to make some decisions on moving forward. So Swaxton Stadium, for those of our stadium options in general, one of the outstanding requests from previous councils was to come back and say where do we want to invest our money in one stadium. And so a report will come back hopefully this next little while on do we invest more in Caledonia, do we do other areas. So at some point we need to make a decision on what to do with some of our stadium enhancements. City operations, and this is the idea of, it's been on the books for many years in ways, but now looking at how do we look at enhancement of public works and consolidation of public works and parks, recreation and culture staff. So looking at the Lavia site, or Dole Street site, the Centennial building, just mentioned this is that there is staff that must work out of there on the facility side. And then the Nemo Lakes, the GNWD lands, where we have some park operations staff working out. Mr. Sims, did you want to mention anything on this one, or I'm sorry, did you want to mention anything on this, or maybe just if it comes up for discussion?
Chair, just briefly, city park staff along with facility staff are working, or I should say public works staff, along with facility staff are working on developing an overall strategy. Needs assessment, that's where we're at with public works at this point. Assuming that it's, how does it work? If it's the entirety of parks operations comes in and common facility, what are the needs? So that's kind of hanging out there.
And then police operations and police annexes, the space needs upgrades for both the facility for our CFP services. And let's make sure I got that right. This, I am going to now turn over to Ms. Legan on financial capacity, just to do the rosy part of all of it.
Yeah, that's the fun part. Okay, how do you move forward with options to finance both some legacy infrastructure that we have deficits around where it hasn't been funded to the level and kept in the condition or met, kept up with respect to capacity. So one would be the detachment building for police servicing. It hasn't kept up space-wise with capacity. Others, particularly public works, there's some very dated buildings there that haven't necessarily been addressed. So there's legacy infrastructure that we need to look at the multiple channels and sources of funding. And then there's strategic new infrastructure moving forward. And of course, in between all of that is keeping everything in really good condition with respect to our facilities maintenance and preventative maintenance and upgrades that are required and equipment replacement. So I'm going to start by moving through the concept of the multiple sources of revenues and funds and grants that can, partnerships that can be brought to bear on some of these opportunities for us, recognizing that there are a lot more opportunities than the base of our funnel, which is our capacity in any given year. But over time, strategically managed, we can make our dollars really work for us and really stretch a dollar far. And some of the concepts would be beyond general revenue and property taxes driven there and fees. What is our philosophy around debt? And I have a slide to really put that into consumable terms with respect to, well, it depends. We need to know, what does that look like? I'm going to talk about it. Really maximizing every single grant opportunity that we have and aligning our initiatives to take advantage of those. And then our reserves, and how do we make sure that we're drawing down the reserves and topping up the reserves in concert with what our 5 and 10 and 15 and 20-year plans are, and making sure that we don't mismanage so that we have spikes, unintended spikes. We want to make sure we're leveling those as much as possible. And then really importantly, what are our partnerships with respect to new opportunities with growth of our city and other stakeholders that have an interest in putting in infrastructure where if we work together, neither one will have to foot the full bill, and we'll get something really usable for our community in an innovative way that each partner comes in with real funding, but in a real partnership so that we get what the citizens would like and want to use, but not building, let's say, a high school gym next door to a recreation center, which wouldn't make sense in these times. So let me move to build on what Mr. Greer was saying with respect to we're always investing, we're always working on upgrading our facilities. The facility development reserve here, which has a balance of $3.5 million and is increased every year at about 1.1, 1.2, will be a source of funding for the 5-year capital plan that he talked about. And I just show 4 projects on the books for 2020 that are over $100,000. So this is really a fund for roofs and HVAC systems and big pieces of equipment, and in this case, the aquatic center water slides. Other reserves, really importantly, the general asset management reserve, which is right now fully allocated. And in fact, when we look out over 20 years, this is where we have an actual funding gap, and that's why the 1% asset management funding has been added. The equipment depreciation reserve fund is about our fleet renewal. So this is for fire rescue, for Zambonis, and for our entire fleet. And it's kept at a level so that we can depreciate and replace using these funds. The Community Works Reserve Fund, this is Metro Drive and some other initiatives. It is pretty much fully allocated at this point with in-flight projects. The Sustainability Reserve Fund is a little bit on the light side at this point with $307,000, but this is a reserve specific to long-term payback. So initiatives that impact the environment, that need upfront capital for a very long-term payback, or those that don't have long-term payback, but the measures are other soft measures which are really important to council and to the citizens. So that's key for us. And the development cost charges, or DCC fund, is just under $1 million, is dedicated funding for parks, and that's what its specific use is. The next slide is where we have a little bit more opportunity to have funding for decisions taken at the council, by council. General capital reserve sits at $2.5 million, and this is where, when we have a discussion about year-end surplus, the decision can be made of how much can go into this particular fund, into this reserve. So this is almost entirely topped up by surplus, and it provides the most opportunity to deal with the strategic infrastructure deficit issues that we have and strategic new builds that are on the horizon. The Strategic Infrastructure Reserve Fund, this is funded through gaming and Fortis revenues on an annual basis. Right now, it's being drawn down about $600,000 a year for land acquisitions and about $300,000 for sidewalk infrastructure and that sort of thing as well. There's been more initiatives pegged to this fund. The Loudon Boathouse design and the Rotary Centennial Garden to complete that our goals here. But a lot of different initiatives that we would call strategic infrastructure also just funded through regular revenues coming forward. And then the last, there is a strategic partnerships reserve that has no funding in it to date. This is one that could provide an opportunity where we see a potential partnership with respect to a future large sporting event, for example, or one of our other partners being one of the First Nations or others to host or have some kind of opportunity. So in the future, we could start to build some funding there. So I said earlier I would talk about debt and foreshadowing at some point a debt philosophy discussion that we can have. And just back of the envelope, if you look at the bottom line, the last bullet points, to borrow $15 million at our interest rate prescribed to us at 2.27%, our servicing cost to pay the principal and the interest would be about $1 million. So if you're considering a $45 million building asset, we would have a $3 million servicing cost. We can get very creative there if in fact we're vacating, for example, another building that's fully depreciated, but we could lease it to another party. We could use some of that leasing net income back to the city to pay down the debt servicing on a brand new building. So if you're really thinking strategically, financially about the future, we have some opportunity, or I like to call them levers to pull. And the bigger picture is really important, determining the priorities to come through the funnel based on our capacity, but making sure that we're managing that capacity in the best interests and through your direction. So right now, our debt servicing is about $4.7 million. That's 11% of our current limit, which I'm not suggesting we get anywhere near, which would be debt load of about $600 million. But I am suggesting that right now that would be a very conservative debt servicing cost given the size of our annual budget, and might give us some opportunities to move forward. So it is a philosophy discussion, and being an accountant myself, I tend to tread lightly on risk. So when I say very conservative, it is very conservative going forward, but it depends on what our philosophy would be in your direction. So back to the funnel. This is like Jake's what did you call it? Capacity vessel? Capacity box. So he owns a capacity box. This is my funnel. And you can see... this one might be harder to do. But seriously, we need to move into all 5 of those realms with respect to maximizing the opportunities to bring resources to bear on the initiatives moving forward. And back to starting.
So, Mr. Chairman, just coming back to some priority discussions, again, we went through the presentation very quickly. With the desire to go back on anything for council discussion. These are a number of ones we just added in there, some areas to focus on. There are others, as you go down the bottom, there's others will come forward as plans to develop and are adopted, and then also as per council direction. So these are some we know are going to come back to, particularly the city operations facility plan, as Mr. Sims mentioned, the RCMP building capacity issues and public safety precinct. Those are going to be address. Chase River Activity Center, interim solution, we've had that on hold now for a number of years. We really believe we need to move forward with something. With that, it will just let that hole in the next one, South End Community Center, work with the community on some, coming up with what that vision is, really is. We have done work on that. The stadium options is a report that we need to come back to as demand and do activities in different areas, be it at Roxton, or at Caledonia, or the NDSS Community Field, or Evan Park, really where we want to consolidate and put some focus on that. As with the Roxton Stadium Improvement Plan, we're at the opening of the last week with the team announcement. But when we purchased that, the Roxton Stadium as well as Rotary, we always knew we were going to have an improvement plans for both of those facilities, so those will come forward also. And so with that, we will turn it back over to you on these sessions.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and yeah, open it up for questions and discussion. So I've got Armstrong, Turley, or
For me, I always look at it, and those whichever regular bodies which may come into effect, like I look at our RCMP building, which public safety or Canada Labor Code could take an issue of what's going on there. And then I look at our city public works, where I think public safety could have an issue in it. So I think those are ones we need to look at, where there's regular bodies that could force us to making certain improvements, or which leave us open to lawsuits because we have not maintained facilities properly or up to standard. So for me, the two that I see as high priorities, number one is the city works yard. I think that is beyond tolerable. I don't know how people even work in there, followed by, for me, the second one would be the police building capacity, because those all have regulatory bodies that will be stepping into it. And then I think we need to look at, again, I would like to see something done in South Denamo, because in South Denamo I refer to Chase River, where there's nothing. Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Chair. So with regard to the funnel, I have a question on that. Under partnerships, is that, I know we haven't made a decision on it yet, that would include sponsorships as well, or is that a separate item?
If you're, through the chair, if you're looking at alternate sources of funding, sponsorships is definitely on the list. So I guess you could put it on the list as a candidate for funding and how you use that. It's probably more, I was thinking more in the line of operating for the sponsorship, but yeah. To be honest, we've been having conversations at the staff table about being creative with our fiscal resourcing as opposed to just taxation, you know. Fees and charges fits into this, sponsorship fits into this. Anything we can do to rationalize pay-as-you-go, philosophy, all these types of things. So sponsorship is another tool to achieve some more fiscal capacity. You see cities in the Lower Mainland putting up these huge digital billboard signs for the reason that they're getting huge dollars out of them. Hundreds of thousands a year to community sponsor things. So there's lots of ways to seek funding. This is really just more on the capital side, I think, this list. But right now, we've been talking to council about thinking outside the traditional box, and just instead of going out and doing our own debt financing for buildings, maybe we should be looking at other. There's a combination of those sources here, but also so sponsorship would be ultimately. Well, I don't think it'll generate the level of funding that some of these other things could. But it's there for sure.
Just have a comment here.
I just wanted to kind of put a little marker on council's place. That in 2004 was identified other fire station in Hammond Bay was required for future development. So that was taken off the table, I think about 2015. So just keep in mind as we develop our fire master plan coming up that you're probably going to see those, and Mr. Harding kind of alluded to that. There's going to be, as other plans are developed, those are also going to be put through and put forward to council in the future as well too. So don't want you to be shocked when that comes to you.
Thanks. Councillor Thorpe.
Well, thank you, Chair. Through you, a couple of comments. First of all, thank you, Mr. Harding and Ms. Leggins. This is a topic that I wanted us to address at GPC, and I totally agree with Mr. Rudolph that we need to come back, I think, for a more detailed conversation about some of the slides that you've presented. And I agree with the comments of Councillor Armstrong about priorities, and I think that we will need to make decisions, as you've identified, Mr. Harding, on some of these buildings that we just need to fish or cut bait and decide how we're going to approach the problem related to them. I'd also like to go back to Mr. Harding's very first slide, just for the benefit of the public, because I'm sure a lot of our 100,000 approximate citizens have no idea of the history of our city and how it changed so dramatically in 1974 when we absorbed roughly a dozen adjoining areas. And there was a good side to that. It gave us some facilities, but there was a bad side to that because we inherited some facilities that become problems. And it also explains the disparity between areas of our city in terms of some parts have sidewalks, some don't. Some have facilities, some don't. And there's a wide range of quality of what we offer to our citizens, and it's because of that history. And we've been playing catch up ever since. That said, I'm very interested, and I've expressed this before, in the whole idea of debt financing. And like Ms. Leggins, I am very cautious about entertaining debt, but I think we are very conservative at this point. And when I hear and I see on the slide that a servicing cost of $1 million for borrowing $15 million at an interest rate, fairly low interest rate of 2.27%, I'd be very interested, hypothetically, if there was a $45 million project, what would the cost comparison be of debt financing that? Maybe piggybacking a couple of projects, borrowing a substantial amount at the current rates, as opposed to waiting 10 years and the cost of building those same projects down the road, given inflation and potential cost of borrowing in the future. I know that's hard to predict, but it's something I'd like to see us investigate. So I throw that out there as part of our future discussion. But we're very fortunate in this city to have so many wonderful facilities. It takes a lot to maintain them, and replacing them is expensive, but it's something that we have to tackle, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I look forward to a more detailed one, looking at specifics. Thank you.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you, Chair. A question on process. I know that we're undertaking a facilities review. You're asking us to kind of reflect upon what we'd like to see in advance of that review? Or in theory, I would think we would receive the review, and this is the condition, and these are the seismic, and these are our opportunities based on financing, and then have a list. But I'm just curious, are you asking us to kind of say what we would like, what we're kind of hearing politically, or what we prefer to see, and then we receive the facilities plan?
So, to the chair, so the facilities review really is really the overall condition assessment, which will feed into a number of plans. So it'll feed into the overall OCP, but particularly the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Plan, and then some of the facilities issues that we're going back with the space needs for the RCP building or public works yard consolidation. So those will come forward. As you, it's a difficult one to answer on one component, because you'll notice all the whole list of the community projects. So at some point we just have to start saying, or like to say, what would council like us to focus on? Because as you see, there's a lot of facilities that are in that list, and there's definitely not funding mechanisms to do a fraction of them, let alone all of them in it. So we are heading into this, the OCP Plus, or the most broader planning process, which will help bring some of those to funnel those, again, using the funnel, if I can pull your funnel. We'll hopefully get some priorities on those, but even before those are done, though, there are some, we want to get in front of you with some overall condition of our facilities, because I know council is also getting lobbied daily on different amenities that either be in the cultural section, the recreation, or police services, or whichever it is, you're getting lobbied in many different ways. We want to make sure we give you an overall picture, and then hopefully have some discussion to start moving towards where it is you'd like us to focus on.
See, and if I may, just to comment, the wealth of information that was received in this report was amazing. As we're getting lobbied by the community, it's really good for us to be able to see, like, these are all the facilities we own. It's quite impressive. There's also a cat, and I'd like to work there, wherever that is.
Yeah,
That's SPCA, but,
Well, that one is the animal shelter, which is definitely in need of
right?
have a decision and working on a business plan now. Do we reinvest and rebuild out there or do some other aspects? So it's another decision. We didn't list all the buildings for decision points for council, but there's a lot of ones that are going to come forward. Obviously, decisions have to be made.
And follow up if I may, what I factor into my decision making is things like, we hear the kin hut is not up to code or whatever we call it, but is it at risk of hurting someone? In which case then that ups it in my priority list, right? So I was kind of thinking the facilities plan would give us that information of these are the ages of our buildings and these are the chances of them being a liability sooner than this other building because of its age or,
Yeah, so again, if I just, for council and for everyone, so the facility plan right now is really that condition assessment of all of our buildings, which will provide some of those key end of life or key components that need to be renewed, and we'll need to, and then if some are on the condition assessment, if they're further along than we anticipated, then we either move that forward on the capital plan. Some that we may think aren't as bad as we need, then we'll move them further back. So that information will help drive, say, the Parks and Recreation Culture Master Plan information, as well as some of these other business issues that we have to go on. Consolidation of operations. Where are we with RCP, building enhancement, things like the animal shelter? What can we do with it?
okay, thank you.
Good, so I've got Brown, Krogh, Bonner, Markman, Turley, and that's probably going to round out our time here to move on, so make sure you get your questions and comments in. So Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thanks. I do think it's important to have a conversation around debt policy, although I just think there's some big projects that need to be considered in that as well, such as the waterfront and the future dam upgrades. So they're huge hits that would really probably change my opinion quickly on what the remainder was and how comfortable I was borrowing it. I'm also sort of interested in, so I do have my top three, and I'll just quickly say them. Mars must be in retrograde or something, because Armstrong and I are in complete alignment here.
That's a first.
But I'll also be sort of interested in, there's multiple public works yards in terms of funding options or other places. So I'm not saying this is being an option, but if we consolidated the public works, does that now open up the Prudhoe for sale or some other use that can then, can this be done in a strategic manner that reduces the overall cost to property sales or bringing groups, RCMP, I know Search and Rescue has got their expansion project, but if you're renewing that building, is there a way to piggyback? I think those conversations would be interested in keeping service levels the same while capturing new facilities, but trying to reduce the cost and acquisitions and properties that we own overall. So I think there's a really good conversation to be had here, but more importantly, some good planning exercises to be done to come up with some of these creative options.
Mayor Krogh?
Thank you very much. Councillors Thorpe and Brown have said to some extent the things that I wanted to say, but what I want to emphasize is what I've said around this table before. We are currently getting our development model up and running, and my hope and expectation for that is that it will attract other businesses to our community, other investment, which I think is very important. But I think one thing we do have to recognize and pay compliments to are the previous councils who have taken a fiscally conservative approach to borrowing. As I've said before, I want the economic development model to be up and running and working hard to ensure that when the downturns that inevitably occur in our economic system occur, they are already in a position to have attracted as much investment as they can and continue to do so for a whole variety of reasons. I still think this is the most wonderful place in the world to live, etc. But having said that, I wouldn't want us to start using up the amazing capacity we have around debt financing until such time as the best boost and bang for the buck can be obtained for the economy, when lots of laid-off people and businesses in our community are in danger of failing. I would think that would be the opportune and appropriate time for us to consider or have in place already, certainly the planning, so that we could proceed with some of these major projects, whatever they are. I'm not going to reveal my cards today like Councillor Brown. I'm not sure what the priorities are. I've expressed before my sympathy for the South End and an equivalent of an Oliver Woods. But I've also toured the facilities in which our staff have to work, and it's a pretty dismal collection of trailers, basically, and modular units that many people work out of in buildings that are, gosh, I think actually older than me even. So I just throw that out, that I think what we should be looking at in the next year or two is what are the priorities are based on community interest, public need, safety, but not necessarily start everything overnight and use up that wonderful capacity. Basically, we could be spending 10 times as much on debt servicing, essentially 11%, roughly, well, 9 times as much money as we are now. So let us use that wisely at the time that it gets the best advantage for the public. I'm just grateful previous councils didn't spend it all, so that we do have actually debt capacity to handle.
Councillor Bonner, then Martin.
Your Worship, I don't think the buildings are that much older than you. None are made out of mud and brick yet. I'm having a conversation with someone online on Facebook regarding asset management, and they brought up the issue of are we fully funded in our asset management plan for what we have to replace in the next year? And it's always come up a bit of a controversy. So I see in one of these slides that we have 1% asset management funding fully allocated for 20 years. Does that mean that we're fully funded for all our replacements for the next 20 years? Not even close. Oh, they're shaking heads there.
Yeah, we get both of us. Nobody's close.
Want to respond to that, or?
Through the chair, no, we do have a funding gap. So that is why we've continued with the 1% addition each year. And so when we do our next update, either later this year or next year, we'll see how our strategies have hopefully shrunken that funding gap. But the money in that reserve is pretty much used up funding all of the things that we know that we have to do at this point.
Thank you. I am also in favor of a debt policy. I've actually been calling for it before I was elected. But I do have some questions in terms of what can we build. Like I look at the Departure Bay Recreation Center. It's one, maybe 2 stories, I think, on quite a very expensive piece of land. Are we able, as a city, to, on the first floor, build business, offices, that sort of thing? On the second floor, build a recreation plan, and on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors, build housing.
So I'm going to just go back on your first question too. Again, why this is so important on the asset side of things for facilities, and that's why we're not 100% clear yet. Our asset management plan, when this is completely done, helps drive where we are with the asset renewal and asset plan. So there's an additional on this one. So in regards to your other question, so if it's on our parkland, no, we can't do housing, and we're limited with commercial. But there are opportunities on parkland with other groups and organizations. So, for example, we're in library or some other nonprofit organizations that could fit within a parks designation. There's lots of opportunities with that. And as Megan mentioned, some of those lease improvements, you can do that. The Tuxton project that's going to be going there's some more options for that type of aspect, because there's the park dedication that you can change some of that dedication, and you can change some of that land use with it, and or use some of the properties for some of those opportunities. But you have to change the zoning and dedication on some of the parkland to some of those options.
So if it wasn't parkland, say, just for, we're going to take the police station and level the building across the street and build a brand-new police station, we could add, if we chose, 3 more floors of condos or apartments above it. Could we do that?
I'm going to let Mr. Lindsay talk about land use, but in theory you can. We'd have to talk with the sense of how we utilize housing with city-owned properties.
We have a saying, anything's possible. Partnerships. Yeah, I think, there's technical issues you'd have to get over, and I can hear Councilor Armstrong. I mean, with police and integrating other uses, you'd have to address security issues and all those types of things. But I think the point you're getting at, is there an opportunity to do more than single use? Is there an opportunity to look at partnerships? Absolutely, whether it's us with the school board or us with BC Ambulance or the police, federally, the police, I think there are opportunities. You know, the scale of the building or the response is somewhat dependent on the location. For departure bay, for example, there's a limit on building heights in the neighborhood plan. Those are all things that you can look at a site-by-site basis for sure.
And the reason I brought this up is that if we can build a police station and then sell out 3 floors of nice condos in the safest place in the city, overlooking the harbor, we can actually pay for the police building and our debt is 0. So I'm just thinking, time to think out of the box a bit.
So an example of that was the conference center. There was the conference center component, but then there was the businesses that were then sold off with the conference center. And then, of course, the museum moved into it, so there's a variety of uses in there. There just wasn't housing added on top, but that could have been included too, actually.
So I've got Councilor Martin, Turley, and Armstrong, and then we'll probably wrap up the conversation.
I'll be fairly quick. First of all, thank you. This is awesome presentation. Just to get a clear understanding. I'm looking forward to the facility plan and the assessment of the buildings, because I think as Councillor Hammond said, part of my priorities would be that which buildings are a risk to the public that are using them now, and that being, I'm with Public Works, being able to consolidate or do something with the buildings with Public Works and a South End Recreational Center, but I'm also very aware of the number 4 fire hall, because being in insurance, I do know that there are the new suburbs that are being built in that area that actually do not qualify for being protected from insurance point of view because they're further than 8 kilometers from the nearest fire hall. So you would save a lot of citizens some money on their insurance, let alone protect lives, if we had a number 4 fire hall. So just letting you know, sharing my points of view of priorities. Thank you.
Councilor Turley?
Thank you. With regard to debt financing, I'm assuming that the $1 million servicing fee cost is over the total amortization of the loan, and if so, that must include payment of principal plus interest?
So just to, if I may, Mr. Chair, to answer, it's one of the interesting things, and I have to dig in a little bit deeper, is the cap at a 20-year term for our borrowing, and most of our assets would have at least a 40-year useful life. So I'm working with Laura, we're going to investigate that a little bit more, and there's probably very valid reasons, mostly risk aversion would be my suspicion, but if we went to a bank per se and didn't have to borrow through the mechanisms we do, there would be a 40-year, probably a 30-year at least, which would lower your servicing, but it is the principal and debt servicing over 20 years at the 2.27.
That was my second question, was the length. Thank you.
Councilor Armstrong?
One thing that concerns me is our reliance on the Fortis. I mean, today the stock market crashed again. There was over $5 trillion in stock trade-off today, unheard of. Fortis stock crashed by 6%. So we're not necessarily going to get all these revenues here coming in. Same thing with the gas infrastructure rate. So we need to start finding other things besides relying on those dollars. The other thing I think of is I don't think we're ever going to get lower interest rates ever than what we're going to see now. Apparently the bank is going to, or the federal government is going to borrowing rate again because recession's almost here. Like they're saying it's almost here. So we're going to be in trouble. So I think we need to really start to sit down and start hammering out what we are going to do instead of having this conversation 3 years from now. I'm all with what Councillor Brown said, you know, if we identify these areas that we want to see, how can we move them together? Can we sell this property? What's this property value worth? Like if we, for sake of argument, we relocated Public Works to a different site, which isn't as valuable land, we could probably make a lot of value on those dollars and buy it and build on less, you know. So I think we really need to start thinking about that and really start focusing, or we're going to be having the same conversation 4 years from now. And you know, we're going to be paying fines to work, say fines to Canada Labor Code if we don't start dealing with the issues that our public buildings where workers are. Thank you.
Councillor Brown?
Councillor Turner, that's my question.
Okay, great.
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
just
Hill?
next steps. On the next steps piece, we'd like the staff would propose to come to the Finance and Audit Committee with some more opportunities to discuss and understand and unpack the whole concept of debt financing and our capacity, and there's graphs and all sorts of things. When are we retiring our debt and what's on the horizon for long terms? I think Councillor Brown made mention of the dam, and we do have the waterfront walkway things. All these things form part of our total fiscal capacity, not only facilities. So we would be proposing to come forward to Finance and Audit with some more opportunities to unpack that and sort through that. On these, some of these other projects, we would seek your permission to come forward with more information on the Public Works and Operations side of things, so you're informed on the status of the site, some of the needs, and you know, these things could all be phased perhaps. There's opportunities to do things. So there's that. There's the RCMP. These are two of the largest facility issues. Also, there's a collection of smaller ones that were shown in the slides there today that we really should give you a better read on that in terms of the status of those buildings. I think Mr. Harding had a slide about seismic, and some of those buildings are actually in the queue to come forward. So there's a bundle of those. This is the curling rink, Departure Bay, various other smaller, but you know, buildings at the end of their life cycle. The one thing I didn't hear today, but we probably would still have as part of a conversation, is our sporting facilities and some of those types of things, turf fields. I think some of the decisions around the stadiums and that type of thing. So there's a lot of facility related, and of course the waterfront walkway, which you'll receive a report in the coming months on that in terms of seeking a mandate, next steps, and everything. So collectively, it's the funnel is big at the top, and we may have to create a bigger spout at the bottom to undertake these things. But we wait for all these plans and so forth to line up. We will be waiting another 2 years before we get clearance to move forward on some of these things. So in an effort to move the yardsticks up the field, we need to come to you with some more additional information so that you'll be able to make hopefully some decisions around moving forward with some of these projects. And it's not inexpensive. And it's delaying it doesn't solve the problem, it just delays it. So if that's okay, that would be our intent, to come back with maybe more of a detailed, well, not all the history part, but just some more information around each of these pieces, if that would be something of interest to you. But as a minimum, we need to do that anyway.
So are you looking for a particular motion?
No, I just, if you're open to that, we would be scheduling future GPC meeting or two on each of these subjects.
I think that it's important that we make decisions around these sooner than later, so to get more information so that we can further prioritize and make decisions on these different elements would be greatly appreciated. And just quick comments, I think, clear priorities, are to think around safety and sustainability, and I think the city operations facility and RCMP building capacity is something that we do need to move on. And then also I think just in terms of the communications ends of this, around sort of where we are at financially and what potential capital projects we are taking on, to really clearly communicate that to the public so that we can also manage public expectation on sort of requests for other types of capital projects. So thank you, and I guess we'll move on to the next item. Appreciate the presentation. Plastic bags. Item 2, and Tim, you'll be.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Ready to roll?
Yep.
Just briefly, I'm not going to stand and talk too long. I'll ask both Mr. Thompson and Ms. Gillane to speak a little bit, address the report, and hopefully we'll keep that information brief as well. Briefly though, before they come up, in November of 2018, Council asked us to get on with public consultation, which we did over a 6-month period ending in about June of 19. So it's been on the item for a long, we're on the council radar for a long time, of course. So as council's aware, in July of 2019, we were ready to come forth with a bylaw for your consideration. That kind of got sidetracked with the Supreme or the Appeal Court shutting down Victoria's bylaw. And at that time, BC indicated its intent to regulate plastic use or single-use plastics, and the Government of Canada is also going to be getting into the business. And then, as council is well aware, in January, Supreme Court of Canada rejected Victoria's appeal, and so Victoria's consequently repealed their bylaw and gone back to the Minister for approval. So we have multiple options in the report, but we also owe you still just a report on the consultation process, which Mr. Thompson will speak to briefly, and then Ms. Gillane will give just an overview of the regulatory framework around this particular topic, and then I may just come back up to wrap it up. So, if you want to. It's probably better to be visible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as Mr. Sims says, we've been working on this file for a while. We've been moving cautiously every time we were ready to come forward with an idea. The landscape changed around us, so it's taken us a bit to get stable, but here we are. As Mr. Sims says, the purpose of this is to give you an update on the consultation stage that we went through last year. Through the course of about 3 months, to both the residents and business communities of Nanaimo. So we conducted online surveys, in-person meetings, retailer roundtable hosted by the Chamber of Commerce, and the purpose of the consultation was focused on how to change behavior. Council had directed us to figure out a regulation to change behavior, so the focus of the consultation was in that vein, not should we do this or should we not do it. So moving on, the response was great. Had a significant response from both the residential community and the retailer community, so we're very pleased to see that. And we publicized this fairly heavily, so it was that was key in getting that level of feedback. I'm going to start with the retailer survey. So this is coming from both online feedback and from our roundtable. We wanted to get a picture of the landscape in Nanaimo. Who was already moving on this file, and what would it take to change? So first question we asked was, what is our audience? What retailers are responding to this survey? Almost 70% were small businesses, so that was good news. I think that represents a fairly good picture of the business community in Nanaimo. We asked who's already taking action on plastic bags. Full 50% of respondents are currently not providing plastic bags. And if they do provide plastic bags, do you charge a fee for this? So this is getting at the financial incentive or disincentive for consumers to choose to take a bag or not. As you see there, most of them are charging somewhere in the 3 to 5 cent per bag range. Really interesting number here. Of those businesses that responded and knew how many plastic bags that they were providing into Nanaimo, that number is 2.5 million per year. So this is an extremely low end of the number of bags that are coming in. We have no idea of what the actual figure is, but I would suggest that it is many times that number. One of the specific concepts that council had asked us to look into was a deposit system, recognizing that plastic bags fall under the Environmental Management Act and recycling regulation. Recycle BC is the provincial stewardship agency responsible for that. Their feedback was that they had no interest and no desire to proceed with a deposit system, and retailers on the other side were not really interested in managing something like that independently. When asked retailers what other alternatives they offer, many had paper bags, cardboard boxes, some provided a carry-out service, so residents could take advantage of that, as well as totes, so more solid basket-type devices. It was good to see lots of options being used out there. Asking retailers what they wanted to see in terms of support, educational supports for a proposed regulation from the city. Leaflets and handouts that will be available at the till to explain how the regulation works, what its purpose is, as well as links to online city resources. So really wanted to lean on the city to explain what was going on, and we're happy to do that. Another question was on exemptions. So we provided the exemptions for feedback that are included in the Victoria bylaw. We use that as a model to solicit feedback and identify questions and issues. A number of exemptions generally supported by either anywhere from a third to half of respondents. Things like protecting bakery goods, frozen food, loose hardware items, bulk items, things like that. No real surprises there, so that was good to see. Of note, 9 of the 44 responses we received said there shouldn't be any exemptions. A couple of clarifications, and the idea that certified compostable bags may be considered as an exemption. Certified compostable bags are compatible with our curbside organics collection system. So just a few summary points on the retailer survey. 70% are local businesses. 50% do not currently provide plastic checkout bags, and 60% of retailers currently provide an alternate plastic checkout bags. On the resident side, we asked them, what would it take to change your behavior? Whether a regulatory incentive, a financial incentive, disincentive, or some other regulatory mechanism. You'll see the numbers don't add up to 100%. We gave the residents options to select multiple answers, but by far the biggest component, the strongest regulatory tool that they saw was banning the provision of plastic checkout bags. Education being another critical component to that. Of the other responses, many are already using reusable bags, so we're seeing that the uptake on rejecting single-use plastic bags is already there, and it's already fairly strong. There was some resistance to any regulation, not surprising. Again, compostable single-use plastic bags came up through that as well, and there was a voice for adding additional single-use plastics to this kind of regulation, so whether that be straws or plastic utensils or takeout containers, things like that. We are seeing that other jurisdictions are taking slightly different tacks to this. They're either rolling those kinds of things into their current regulations or using plastic bag regulation as a test water to determine if it is effective for adding new materials to. Moving on, checking on price sensitivity. So if you had a fee, what level of fee would most likely change your behavior? Fairly well distributed. Some are very price sensitive at 25 cents, others less so at $1. Other ranged from 0, not surprisingly. So moving along, what would you do if regulation banned plastic checkout bags? 71%, close to 72% purchase and reuse reusable bags. So that's the other one. Use all the plastic bags I have in my closet. So this is one of the challenges with single-use plastic bags is they tend to be obtained much quicker than they can be used. So at the end of the year or some period of time, there's a bag of bags underneath the kitchen sink. What happens to those? So this is part of the equation around the recycling rate. The Recycle BC reports being quite low. A lot of them end up underneath kitchen sinks and disappear from the data set. So that was an interesting comment. So moving on to paper checkout bags, recognizing this regulation is about single-use checkout bags in all their forms, be it plastic, paper, or something else. Question here was quite straightforward. Should they have minimum levels of recycled content? Overwhelmingly, yes. There are local suppliers that provide recycled content paper bags, so that's not a difficult thing to obtain. If we mandate a fee for paper bags, again, what price level are residents sensitive to where it changes the decision from yes, I'll take a paper bag to no, I won't take a paper bag, I'll find an alternative. Most were in that 25-cent range. Again, 0, 5, 10 cents. Most retailers right now who have paper bag programs in the 5 to 10 cent range, but here we're trying to drive the behavior to the point where shoppers are choosing not to take a bag at all. Again, possible exemptions. Live fish keeps coming up. And strong support or consistent support for all the considered exemptions. Ones that stand out there are newspapers and, again, frozen food. Possible exemptions, 186 respondents, so that's more than 10%, said there should be no exemptions. And again, on the education side, how should we publicize and educate residents on new regulation? Significantly support for social media. A lot of our respondents were engaged online, so that's not surprising. And then city resources on the website, so that ties well with what the retailers were telling us, that we really need to support this out of City Hall. So the common themes, strong support, both on the residential side and on the business side for moving forward with the regulation, specifically banning single-use plastic bags and charging a fee for single-use paper bags. A lot of retailers and residents are already not using single-use bags, so that's a good thing. That behavior's already started. Education is key to any success. General consensus on the list of exemptions, again, using Victoria's as a model, meat, frozen food wrapping, and live fish. And again, substantially, a number of respondents said there should be no exemptions. And there should be minimum recycled content levels in paper bags with a minimum fee of 25 cents each. So that is what we heard from the public during our consultation on a regulation. Certainly we're looking for council's input on this. It is also going through a legal review based on this type of model and the current jurisprudence. So Supreme Court of BC appeal, where Victoria is currently sitting at, as well as some more recent municipalities that have revamped their bylaw based on the new legal landscape. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Gillane for discussion of that landscape.
Mr. Chair and Council, I apologize. I was remiss in not actually formally introducing to you Kirsten Gillane, our zero waste recycling coordinator. So I'm very pleased to she's in front of you today. So.
Thanks, Bob.
Council. So as David went into, there's a lot of different players in this checkout bag issue. So going all the way up to the Canadian government, provincial government, and then of course affecting local governments, and the public has a great interest. So just in the past 6 months, the provincial and federal governments have made really significant announcements in what this would affect in our local bylaw. Just in June 2019, the Government of Canada announced a plan to ban all harmful single-use plastics under the Environmental Protection Act. And this includes shopping bags, as well as straws, cutlery, plates, and stir sticks. Soon after that announcement, the Canadian Council of Ministers for the Environment announced their first phase of the Canada-wide action plan on zero plastic waste. So behind that is a statement that nearly 90% of Canada's plastic waste is not recycled nor recovered. And that represents an economic loss of $7.8 billion. The strategy approach aligns with the Ocean Plastics Charter that the Canadian government adopted in 2018, and it's informed by the recently released, so in January of this year, the draft science assessment of plastic pollution, and it's part of the Canada's plastic science agenda. The science assessment confirms that bags and straws are harmful to the environment as well as human health and wildlife and habitats. So the CCME will develop a roadmap for management of single-use checkout bags, and it's set to complete this work by the end of 2021. And a month following that announcement by the federal government, the province released their Clean BC Plastics Action Plan and Policy Consultation Engagement Strategy, of which there's 4 action areas, and one is a ban on single-use packaging. The provincial government wants to determine the types of plastic packaging to ban, and then as well as identify exemptions, like David mentioned, so what has effect on different health, safety, and accessibility for the public. So in the Plastics Action Plan, the province has 2 primary policy options. The first is to consider provincial bans under the Environmental Management Act. And then the second is to support the development of recycled content performance standards being led by the federal government. So essentially supporting the senior government to the province. In that plan also there's 3 remaining action areas. So the first is to dramatically reduce single-use plastics in landfill and in the waterways. The second is for the plastic bottle and beverage container returns. And then the last one is reducing plastics overall. So the province also highlighted in the Plastics Action Plan the need for interjurisdictional strategies when considering bans on single-use bags. So they mentioned the need to avoid duplicating regulations and then also have a harmonized approach on the provincial level. But they also recognize the balance between that and having immediate action to protect the environment within the province. And they also recognize that local governments do need clarity on the process, and part of the consultation process, the feedback will inform this process for local governments. And currently, single-use checkout bags are regulated under Section 5 of the Recycling Regulation, so part of the stewardship program with Recycle BC for residential packaging and printed paper. So the bans would affect existing regulation and the Recycle BC's delivery plan. So because of that, a provincial ban would likely result in a complex and time-consuming process. The consultation process for the BC plan did end in September 30th. So they have said that they are to release their What We Heard report this winter, so winter 2020. We have yet to see that report. Also in the summer, the BC Court of Appeal struck down the City of Victoria's checkout bag regulation bylaw, and that decision was affirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada in their dismissal of Victoria's leave to appeal. So that was just on January 23rd, so a month and a bit ago. The court's findings were that the dominant character of the law was for environmental protection and not for business, which brought into account the whole history of that bylaw, going back to a letter from the Surfrider Foundation stating that single-use plastic bags pollute local waterways in Victoria. Under the community charter, section 8.3J, the council may, by bylaw, regulate, prohibit, and impose regulations in relation to protection of the natural environment. But because that is a sphere of concurrent jurisdiction, as per section 9, it requires approval from the minister prior to implementing the bylaw. So in following from the Supreme Court's dismissal, the City of Victoria updated their checkout bag regulation bylaw with clear reference to the section on protection of the environment and have since forwarded their bylaw for approval from the minister. So they join some other jurisdictions, so the Regional District of North Okanagan, who was one of the first to submit it to the province in July of 2019. Also the City of Richmond and the District of Saanich. The Tupino and Ucluelet have recently repealed their bylaw, which was set to be introduced in January 2020, and their bylaw is now in submission to the province for approval. Some bylaws that have been implemented are Qualicum Beach, Cumberland, Salmon Arm, and Squamish. And then there's also the City of Vancouver, but that's under the Vancouver Charter, so some separate legislation there. But as of January 2020, they've put in a ban on phone cups and takeout containers, and they're set to put bans on shopping bags and cups in January 2021. So that sort of explains the different issues and all the actions that have taken place over the past 6 months. And more detail is put in the staff report.
So at this point, we're here to facilitate a discussion with council as to how to proceed. We presented a number of options in the report, including leaving space for council's creativity and their wisdom. So, Bill, I'm not sure if you want to say anything before we move on to the discussion.
Well, thanks to both of you. I mean, this actually represents a great deal of work on both Mr. Thompson and Mr. Williams' part, so I'd like to express that presentation, or that preparation that was shown here. So, this council may or may not be aware of the draft bylaw that we have gone to public consultation with is under review by the city solicitor, and so that's hanging out there. So that may be informed by the discussion with council as we go forward. So as Mr. Thompson hinted, there's a number of options in the report. And because of the complexity of the issue, we wanted to leave it at the council table to determine the best path forward. As hinted, there's the option for council to proceed on its own bylaw. That's one option. Another option is to proceed with passing a bylaw and then submitting it, as Ms. Blaine said, under the sphere of concurrent jurisdiction to the minister. The other is to hold the bylaw together and recognizing that senior governments are moving on this file, although timing is uncertain on that. And So those are the three basic options, unless there's something else, like Mr. Thompson's words and the creativity and wisdom of council, which was very good. So this is now to table this past you, unless there's any questions specific to what you've heard here today.
Great, well, appreciate the presentations and we'll move forward with discussion. I'll entertain motions. So I've got Brown, Armstrong, Grove, and Durham.
Squeak in first. I would like to move that the Governance and Priorities Committee recommends that Council approve the wording of the draft checkout bag regulation bylaw 2019, number 7283, and direct staff to prepare bylaw for first, second, and third reading for the next scheduled council meeting. Option 2.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Bonner.
I forgot my name tag.
Discussion. Yeah, Steve's good.
I appreciate all the staff time and the input on this. And I appreciate that it's a complex topic. But I think you can either leg or you can lead. And plastic bags and in general, single-use items are contamination in our waste stream. And they also all add up, and I think it's a greater picture that deserves discussion to be talked about in the future, but this is the first item. It reduces capacity in the landfill and things like that. So I see this as congruent with sort of larger ambitious goals around 90% conversion, around ensuring that our municipal infrastructure is maintained with public funds over the long term, and part of that requires, I think, starting to look at some of these items that are harmful to that overall. The numbers are clear, the population, our population is there, the business is there, and I think at the end of the day it also has other external positive benefits. So I think this is the path forward. There's other off-ramps if we are faced with some legal challenges in the future, such as making the decision to repeal and introducing a new bylaw or the same bylaw but requiring ministerial approval. But in terms of expediency and a level of risk that I'm comfortable with, I have to go with option 2.
Okay, I've got Armstrong, then Martin, and then Turley.
I will not be supporting number 2. The courts have been very clear that environmental is not a reason to do this. If you want to do it for environmental reasons, as you stated, you must go through the minister for approval. So from my perspective, I think the proper route to go, and I think the proper route for the advice of taxpayers' dollars as well, is to go through ministerial approval. We obviously, other municipalities have approved theirs to go through ministerial approval. That's what the courts have requested. So I'm not prepared to put a legal challenge up and then repeal it and then have to pay for lost revenue. So my vote will be for ministerial approval. Thank you.
Got Martin, Turley, and Micro.
Thank you. I will not be approving this option as much as I love taking risk and I love challenging process. I think in this case, because of precedents that have been set, that really we need to go through, send the message that yes, we're looking at doing this, but we're going to go forward to the minister because open and transparent, this is about the environment. So, thank you.
So, given the motion that's on the floor, I'd like to make an amendment. And I'd like to add the wording after, where are we here? After third reading, the next scheduled council meeting, that the bylaw be forwarded to the Minister of Environmental and Climate Change Strategy for approval.
That's
Now,
option
that is more option 1. So what I'll do is entertain that as a separate motion. Should this motion
Creative element.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm looking at the clock, and if this is going to go a very long time, I'm afraid I've got to get going. But I don't want to miss this vote, but having said that, I will not support this motion. Very simply, it's fairly clear in the law what the law is. I appreciate Councillor Brown's position on this. A matter of a few weeks, months, potentially here or there before this happens. I don't see as that substantial problem. I think the very fact we're discussing this, that it's pretty clear council wishes to move forward to it. Given what the surveys have indicated, I think businesses are already undertaking this in any event, and certainly people are using it. But the more important thing for me is the communities that have gone ahead without ministerial approval are, with great respect, very small communities that are not likely to be the subject of a legal challenge. We are a much more substantive community with a much more substantive population, and communities much larger than ours, such as Richmond, as has already been mentioned, and others, have chosen to look at the BC Court of Appeal ruling, which is very clear. Leave having been denied by the Supreme Court of Canada, this is the law in British Columbia. And with great respect, as much as I appreciate the desire to move forward, I just don't think that I can look at the citizens of an island and say, well, I felt it was more important to put you at risk of wasting money on legal fees when there is a process that would, in fact, given the government's indications on this provincially, obviously be approved in all likelihood and allow us to do that which will clearly comply with the BC Court of Appeal and essentially what amounts to the Supreme Court of Canada ruling on this issue by making the decision they did. So I cannot support the motion. I will certainly support option one and move option one in due course if this is defeated.
No more first-time speakers. Yeah, I'll say something and then Councillor Brown. I absolutely believe that we need to regulate what I see as an unnecessary wasteful practice that disrupts city infrastructure and our waste management services. I do think that the most expedient way forward is to put a bylaw. I think that it's absolutely within our rights to regulate businesses, and I think that the rulings that we have seen, the section 9.2 is under debate, and it's not clear exactly what that means, but from the legal analysis that I made, the most logical sense to me was that if you have the right to regulate something for whatever reason, as long as that reason is valid, you have the right to regulate it. If you want to add on top of it the environmental consequences, you're more than welcome to, but we have the right to regulate businesses with respect to municipal purposes, and that involves contamination in our recycling, it's involved with plastic bags in our sewer infrastructure, and I think that we need to stand up and exercise our rights where we have them. In terms of our municipalities that have gone ahead and regulated, they may be smaller, but Qualicum Beach, Squamish, Salmon Arm have done so. And I think that when we take a page of the book of like the time duration to actually get the regulation through and for it to work, the City of Victoria did this ban a year ago, or a year and a half ago, and now they have 97% compliance with this regulation. And when we look at what 97% compliance with the regulation would mean in the city of Nanaimo, that would mean 2 million plastic bags a year that are not being sold. And when we look at a zero waste value practice that we subscribe to, the first is refuse and reduce. And if there's something that's an unwasteful, unnecessary practice that we've all gotten a bad habit of using these single-use bags, and we absolutely don't need to use them, we need to start putting into practice the policies that can avoid that, because it is costly on many different fronts for the municipality. We end up with all this crap in our landfills and plugging up our different processes. So I'm absolutely in favor of putting this bylaw through now, and we can change our course if there is a legal action taken, but not to cross that bridge until we have to come to it. So that's my thoughts. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I'll just quickly add that the information that staff has presented, and moreover, and just in response to Councillor Armstrong, my own arguments have from day one been that the bylaw is geared towards the impact on municipal services. There is no doubt, based on the evidence out there, that there is other external positive benefits, but staff have never presented us with an item. We've been the body that has brought the environmental. So So the court struck down the Victoria bylaw on clear environmental reasons. I think our staff have been very cognizant about that and presented us a staff report and bylaws and information based on our ability to regulate items based on their impact on municipal services. Regulations do work. That's why for seatbelts, that's why for litter, and that's why Victoria has seen an adoption rate even though their bylaw was struck down. They do work. It sends a message. And I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for the minister when the RDN solid waste management plan has sat with them for over 2 years and there is no signature and it does not allow us to move ahead on some of the more important aspects of our quest to get to zero waste. That's it.
So, yeah, Councillor Brown or Councillor Bonner, and then if I don't see any more hands, we'll call the question.
Just a short thing, I view this bylaw as a bylaw regulating checkout bags of all shapes and sizes. And it only mentions offhand plastic bags. So I think we're well within our rights as a city to regulate checkout bags by our businesses. So that's why I'm supporting this plan as is.
Okay. Calling the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion defeated.
Move off to one.
Second. Call the question.
Second to Mayor Krog.
Call the question.
Call the question.
I would like to, are we going to talk about the exemptions? No. Because
It's a draft.
okay, when we come back, I think just live fish. That's it for 1 year.
Calling the question. Hold on.
Was it seconded? It was moved.
Yeah.
Seconded.
Yeah.
Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Mayor Krog. Discussion.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I didn't speak earlier, but I wish to very quickly say that I do support this option. To me, this is the more prudent and sensible option, which I think will serve us better. Hopefully not, I was going to say in the longer term, I'm hoping in the short term. I would like to see an emphasis on education to go along with this. I realize it's not part of the motion, but I think it's implicit in what our staff has reported. I'm very encouraged to read in the report that retailers and residents are already choosing not to use single-use plastics. So I think we need to build on that and get compliance through education. And I'm also really interested in the option, or not the option, but the idea of the non-compostable, the compostable checkout bags. And I'd be curious to talk to staff later about that and find out what uptake is happening in that regard. I will support this option, thanks.
Any more comments? Just building on what Councillor Thorpe said, education component is very important around zero waste, and I'm so excited to have our new zero waste coordinator on staff. And, so without further, all in favor? Motion carried unanimous.
There we go.
Good work, Katie.
Motion to adjourn.
Let me just,
We have to do an agenda meeting.
We're over our time.
is there appetite to adjourn do the agenda planning at a further meeting?
Yes.
Mr. Rudolph, do you have a question? No. Okay. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have questions?
No, there's no
Okay.
questions.
Motion carried. Adjourned.
Well done.
Good.